The gate guard did not look at her when she handed him the letter. He read it twice, flipped it over as if something useful might be written on the back, found nothing, and then looked at her the way people always looked at her, briefly, and with the specific kind of disappointment reserved for things that arrived smaller than expected. "Omega," he said. "Yes," Sierra answered. He looked at the letter again. "Night shift, chamber corridor, 3rd floor." "I know, it says so." He did not like that she had read her own letter. She could tell by the way his jaw moved. He stamped it anyway, slid a brass key across the stone counter without touching her fingers, and pointed at the inner door without saying another word. Sierra picked up the key, picked up her bag, and walked through. The fortress of Cadden Vale was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something dark and smelling of old stone, the kind of place that pressed down on you the moment you entered, that made your spine understand before your mind did that something powerful lived here. Instead, the inner courtyard was lit with warm lanterns and smelled of pine resin and something close to bread. Servants moved across the stones at a steady pace, not rushed, not afraid. A woman carrying a basket of linens nodded at Sierra as she passed. A young man in a gray uniform mopped the base of the eastern staircase with the bored efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times and expected to do it 10,000 more. It looked, Sierra thought, like a place where people simply lived and worked. She was not sure if that made her feel better or worse. She had arrived at the fortress of the Alpha King of 5 northern packs with exactly 1 bag, 22 years of practice at making herself easy to overlook, and a wolf spirit so quiet and unfinished inside her that most alphas had stopped being able to sense it at all. That last part was useful. It meant she was rarely worth the bother of anyone's anger. She found the housekeeper's office on the ground floor, marked by a wooden sign that said domestic coordination in careful, even letters. The woman inside was named Edna, and she was the kind of person who had organized everything in her life into neat columns and had spent 40 years being mildly irritated by anything that wouldn't fit. She looked at Sierra's letter, looked at Sierra, looked at the letter again. "You're young," she said. "I'm 22. "I can see that." Edna set the letter flat on her desk and smoothed it with one palm, as if smoothing it would improve its contents. "You understand what the night shift on the 3rd floor means?" "It means I clean the chamber corridor between midnight and 5 in the morning." "It means," Edna said, with the deliberate weight of someone who had explained a difficult thing many times and had never once enjoyed doing it, "that you do not enter any room on the left side of the corridor without explicit instruction. You leave trays outside doors, not inside. You do not knock, you do not linger. You do not speak unless spoken to, and on the 3rd floor no one is going to speak to you." "I understand," Sierra said. Edna studied her. "Most girls don't want this post. Most girls have other options." There was a pause. Edna's expression shifted, not into something warm but into something that was at least a fraction less sharp. She pulled a gray uniform from the cabinet behind her, folded, pressed, precise. "Dinner is at 6 in the servants' hall. You're on your own until midnight. Your room is in the east wing, 3rd door on the right past the laundry. There's a key already inside." She held out the uniform without standing up. "Don't be late for your first shift, it looks bad for me." Sierra took the uniform. "I won't be late. And stay away from the left corridor doors." "You mentioned that." "I'm mentioning it again," Edna said flatly, "because the last girl who ignored that instruction packed her things the same night and I haven't seen her since. Whether she left or whether something else happened, I genuinely cannot tell you, and I have decided I don't want to know." The room in the east wing was small and cold, and smelled faintly of the person who had been in it before her, something floral and sad, as if they had been the kind of person who kept flowers even in difficult places and then had left in a hurry. Sierra set her bag on the narrow bed, sat down beside it, and looked at the single window that faced the outer wall. Through it she could see a strip of dark sky and 1 pale star. She was not afraid. She had decided some years back to stop being afraid of new places because she moved too often for fear to be a practical response. What she felt instead was something more careful and less dramatic, an alertness, a quiet cataloging of the exits, the sounds, the rhythms of a new building. Every building had rhythms. Every place of power had rules, spoken and unspoken, and if you listened carefully in the first few hours, you could learn most of them before you stepped wrong. So she sat and she listened. The east wing settled into its nighttime sounds, the distant clatter of the kitchen closing up, the low voices of servants finishing the day's last tasks, the particular creak of old stone corridors cooling after a warm afternoon. Somewhere above her, 2 floors up, she thought, a single pair of footsteps moved back and forth at regular intervals, not pacing, patrolling. A guard making rounds with the steady rhythm of someone who had been doing it long enough that the root lived in his feet rather than his head. She ate dinner in the servants' hall, alone at the end of a long table, and she paid attention to everything she was not supposed to look at. The servants sorted themselves in ways that were not official but were absolutely fixed. The betas sat in the center and talked freely. The omegas, there were 4 others, all women, sat near the window and spoke quietly to each other and not to anyone else. The 2 alphas who worked domestic shifts sat nearest the door and were given more food than they asked for without having to ask at all. Nobody spoke to Sira. She ate quickly, cleaned her own dishes, and went back to her room. She slept for a few hours. She set no alarm. Her internal clock was reliable in the way that things become reliable when you cannot afford to be wrong about them. She woke at 11:45, dressed, and made her way to the 3rd floor. The corridor was exactly what Edna's voice had implied it would be. Silent, stone-floored, lit by oil lanterns that gave a warm but ungenerous light. On the right side of the corridor were 3 doors storage, by the look of them, though one had a small square window through which she could see folded linens. On the left side were 4 doors, evenly spaced, each one dark wood with an iron handle, each one closed. The closest one was marked with no sign at all. The farthest one had a small iron bracket beside it, currently empty, where a tray might sit. A cleaning cart waited at the top of the stairs. Someone had prepared it before her shift: mop, fresh cloths, a small bucket, a broom. There was a folded piece of paper propped against the handle. She unfolded it. Mop the corridor floor from north wall to stairs. Polish the iron brackets on the left doors. Do not touch the doors themselves. Leave the tray at the south bracket by 1 am. Do not knock. Return the cart and go back downstairs. Simple, clear. She understood every instruction. She began with the floor, working north to south, moving the mop in steady, quiet strokes. The stone was clean already. Someone had done this recently, but there was always something that settled back between shiftings, a fine layer of dust that lived in old stone buildings the way memory lived in people, constantly returning, never entirely gone. She worked her way down the corridor and found that, close up, the left side doors were not identical. The farthest one, the one with the bracket, had a small mark near the base of the iron handle, a shape worn smooth by many years of the same hand gripping in the same spot. The middle one had a crack in the wood near the top that had been filled with something dark and careful. The door nearest the stairs, the one with no sign, no bracket, no marking, was simply a door, except that the stone floor directly in front of it was more worn than the rest, a slight hollow in the pale stone, as if something had stood in that spot so many times, and for such long stretches that it had pressed itself into the rock. Sira looked at that hollow for a moment. Then she polished the brackets, retrieved the tray from the cart's lower shelf, covered in a white cloth, a pot of something warm underneath, a small roll of bread, a cup, and carried it to the south bracket. She set it down without making a sound. She did not look at the door behind the bracket. She turned and walked back to the cart. It was 12:40. She had 20 minutes left in her first task. She mopped the last section of corridor and was wringing out the mop over the bucket when she heard it, or thought she heard it. A sound from behind the door with the worn stone hollow, not loud enough to be a knock or a voice, not movement, something quieter than that. The kind of sound that happens when a room that has been very still for a very long time shifts barely at the molecular level. She told herself it was the building settling. She finished the mop, replaced it in the cart, and stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, looking back down the corridor at the 4 closed doors and the 1 lantern that flickered near the south end. She thought, whatever this job is, I can do it. Then she went downstairs. The next 6 nights were ordinary. She mopped, she polished, she left trays. The tray at the south bracket was always collected before her next shift. She could tell because the bracket was always empty when she arrived, and the cloth napkin from the previous night was always folded on the top shelf of the cart, ready to be reused, laundered by someone she never saw. She did not hear the sound again. She began to wonder if she had invented it. Sleep deprivation made people imagine things, and night shifts had a way of putting strange edges on ordinary sounds. On the 7th night, it rained. Not hard, the kind of thin, persistent rain that settled into the stone and made everything smell like cold and water, and the deep part of the earth where roots live. The lanterns in the corridor dimmed without going out. The sound of rain on the upper windows was a steady, low drumming that made the silence of the corridor feel thicker than usual. Sierra was halfway through her mop when she noticed the south door was open. Not wide, a fraction, a sliver of dark room visible at the edge, a strip of something blacker than the corridor. She stopped. The tray was already on the bracket. She had set it down 3 minutes ago. She had not knocked. She had not touched the door. She stood very still and considered what to do. The instruction had been clear: do not touch the doors. Edna had not said what to do if a door was already open. That was the kind of omission that felt less like an oversight and more like a test. She picked up her mop and went back to work. She told herself she was walking away from the open door because the instructions said to leave the trays and go, not because some part of her animal senses, the quiet, cracked, incomplete thing that lived in her chest and called itself a wolf, was pressing forward slightly, sniffing the air in a direction she was trying very hard not to acknowledge. She mopped the last 5 meters of corridor with great thoroughness. She replaced the mop in the cart. She was pushing the cart toward the stairs when she heard it, not a settling sound this time, not the building shifting its old bones. A sound that was unmistakably a person. A slow exhale, controlled, deliberate, the way a person breathes when they are working very hard at something invisible, at keeping something contained that wants very much to be otherwise. Sierra stopped the cart. The corridor was empty. The sound had come from the south end, from the open door. She thought about Edna, who had given her this information in a very particular order. Do not touch the doors, do not knock, do not linger. Edna had not said do not listen. Edna had not said do not exist in the corridor while someone on the other side of an open door was working very hard at breathing through something that she could not name and did not entirely understand. Sierra stood where she was. The rain on the upper windows kept its steady rhythm. Another breath from behind the door, then silence, then a sound that was lower and harder to describe, a sound that came from somewhere deep in the chest, not quite a word, not quite anything that language had a name for, the kind of sound that lives in the space between holding on and letting go. She had heard that sound before, not here, not from anyone she had known here. She had heard it from herself alone at 19 in a small room with a window that faced a wall when her pack had handed her a bag and pointed at the road. She had made that sound once because she had decided then that she would only make it once, and she had pressed it into a corner of herself and she had walked. She recognized it now the way you recognize your own handwriting on something you don't remember writing. She did not go to the door. She stood in the corridor for 6 minutes. She knew it was 6 minutes because she counted. It was the thing she had learned to do when the part of her that wanted to act needed to be held still long enough to think, count. When the count reached 360 and the sound from the open door had subsided and the corridor was quiet again except for the rain, she picked up the cart handles and pushed it quietly to the stairs and went down. In her room, she sat on the bed and stared at the window and thought about what the sound behind that door had cost whoever made it. She thought it had probably cost everything they had. She showed up for her 8th shift at midnight, same as always. The corridor was closed and dark and smelled of stone and rain aftermath and the slight pine resin warmth of the lanterns. She checked the cleaning cart. The cloth napkin from last night's tray was folded neatly on the top shelf. She began to mop. At 12:50, she set the tray at the south bracket. She turned and began walking back toward the cart. From behind the south door, the door that was closed tonight firmly, not a crack of dark, came 3 quiet, deliberate knocks. Not from outside the room, from inside, from the south side of the door. As if someone inside had lifted a hand and touched the wood 3 times in a row and then waited. Sierra stopped. She waited. The knocks did not come again. She stood in the corridor with her hand on the mop handle, and something in her chest doing something uncomfortable and complicated. The cracked wolf spirit that she carried around like a broken compass, pressing itself in the direction of the south door with a certainty that the rest of her had not consented to. She thought, I was told not to knock. Nobody told me anything about answering. She looked at the door for a very long time. Then she picked up her cart and went downstairs, and she told herself that she had made the right choice, and she spent the remaining hours of her shift polishing the East Wing corridor with unnecessary precision, and trying not to think about what it meant that a person with absolute power over 5 packs had knocked on a door at midnight like someone hoping that someone, anyone, would notice. She thought about it anyway. She thought about it all the way until morning. Maid. She told no one about the knocking. There was no one to tell. The other Omegas in the servants' hall smiled at her occasionally, in the careful way of people who had learned not to invest in anyone who might be gone by the following week. Edna spoke to her twice in the days that followed, once to ask if the south bracket was being polished as instructed, and once to give her an updated cloth schedule, and neither conversation left room for anything that wasn't directly useful. Sira had been in the fortress for 9 days. She had learned the rhythms of the building by this point the way you learn the rhythms of any place you decide to stay in, not by studying them, but by existing inside them long enough that they press themselves into you. She knew which stair on the east staircase creaked at the 7th step. She knew that the kitchen staff started their morning bread at 4, so by 4:15, the entire ground floor smelled of something warm and yeasty that made the pre-dawn hours easier to exist in. She knew that the day guard changed at 6, and the night guard changed at midnight, and that the guard who patrolled the 3rd floor corridor during her shift was a beta named Orin who nodded at her once per round and otherwise maintained the precise blankness of a man who had decided that performing thoroughness was slightly more work than actual thoroughness. She also knew, because she had excellent ears and a very quiet cart, that Orin's rounds took him past the left side of the corridor without slowing. He did not linger at the south door. He did not look at the bracket, or at the tray, or at anything that could later require him to report on it. She understood that there were entire systems here built around people not noticing things. On the 10th night, the south door was open again. This time it was open wider than a sliver. This time it was open enough that she could see, if she stood at the right angle, a thin line of the interior. Stone wall, the edge of something that might be a desk, a faint amber light that was lower than the corridor lanterns, as if it came from a lamp turned down very far. She did not stand at the right angle. She kept her eyes on the floor in front of her and her hands on the mop, and she worked her way down the corridor as if the open door were not there, and she were the kind of person who moved through the world in straight lines and didn't notice things. She was not that kind of person. She had never been that kind of person. But she had learned to behave like one when it was necessary, and right now it felt necessary. She set the tray, she turned. She was 6 steps away from the door, moving back toward the cart, when a voice came out of the open gap. It was not a sound like the one she had heard on the rainy night. It was words. Low, even, and utterly without any quality that suggested it expected a response. "You were here last night." Sira stopped. She did not turn around. She was looking at the cart at the far end of the corridor, and she was counting, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned that counting gave her body something to do while her mind caught up to a situation. 1, 2, 3. And the night before, the voice said. It was a man's voice. Not old, not young, not anything that landed cleanly in a category. The kind of voice that was what happened when you had spent a long time deciding exactly how much of yourself to give to any given sound before you made it. 4, 5. Sira turned around. The door was still ajar. She could not see anyone through the gap. The amber light shifted slightly, the way lamp light shifts when someone moves across a room. "I have the night shift," she said, because that was the true thing, and the true thing was usually the safest starting place. A pause. "I know." She waited. When nothing else came, she said, "Do you need anything? I can get Edna." Or, "No." Short, flat, not unkind exactly, but the kind of word that closes a door of a different type than the one between them. She nodded even though he could not see it. "All right." She turned back to the cart. "You didn't linger," the voice said, and now it had a different quality, not warmer but more present, more as if it were actually speaking to her rather than speaking into the corridor in general. 8 nights. You never stood at the door." Sira's hands rested on the cart handles. "I was told not to. Most people read 'don't knock' as 'don't acknowledge.' They make a point of showing me they're not looking." She considered that. "I was looking," she said. "I just wasn't performing it." The silence that followed this was a different kind of silence from the corridor's usual silence. It had texture in it. "What's your name?" the voice asked. "Sira." "Sira," he said at once flatly, as if testing the weight of it. "How long have you been here?" 10 days. "Where were you before?" She thought about how to answer that. Not dishonestly, she was not a person who lied as a first strategy, but with the same economy she used for everything. 3 different postings in the last year. Before that, a few places I don't count. Why don't you count them? Because I wasn't staying. Another pause, longer this time. She heard a movement from inside the room, a shift of weight, the sound of someone resting against something solid. Are you staying here? The voice asked. It was not a threatening question. She had heard threatening questions dressed up as neutral ones often enough that she knew the difference, and this was not that. It was, she thought, a genuinely curious question asked by someone who did not ask many and had therefore perhaps not perfected the tone. I need the work, she said, so yes, for now. For now, he repeated. I don't plan farther than that. Something shifted behind the door, not the light. The atmosphere, the particular quality of air in a corridor when the person on the other side of a wall leans forward slightly. Bring the tray inside tomorrow night, the voice said. Leave it on the floor, don't knock. If the door is closed, leave it at the bracket as usual. All right, Sira said. That's all. She nodded again, same as before, no less useless, but her body insisted on the gesture, and pushed the cart to the stairs and went down. She told herself in her room that this was a reasonable development. She had been asked to deliver a tray to a different location. That was within the scope of her duties. It was not unusual. Many household tasks were adjusted over time as the household adjusted to a new worker's habits. This was ordinary. She believed approximately 60% of this. The next night the south door was closed. She left the tray at the bracket and went back to her cart. She did not feel anything in particular about this. She had been given an instruction with a condition, and the condition applied. She continued her shift. But on the night after that, the door was open wider than ever before, nearly half its width, and there was a lamp lit on a low table just inside the room, and Sira stood at the threshold with the tray in her hands and looked at what she was allowed to see without going inside. A large room, stone floor like the corridor but with a dark rug that covered most of it. A desk with papers spread across it in what looked like organized chaos, documents laid flat with small objects holding their corners, pages stacked, something in the far corner that was a map, she thought, pinned to the wall and marked with lines in different colors. The desk faced the wall, not the door, so whoever sat at it would have their back to the entrance. She did not see anyone sitting there now. She stepped inside just far enough to set the tray on the floor, as instructed. She turned to leave. You can see the desk from there, the voice said, from somewhere to her left. Somewhere she had not looked yet because it was outside the arc she had given herself permission to observe. I wasn't trying to read anything, she said. I know you could, though, the papers aren't hidden. She looked at the desk, numbers mostly, long columns, a letter in the top corner that she could not fully see. I can move the tray somewhere else, she offered. You can leave it where it is. She looked toward the voice, finally, because he had spoken enough times now that she was running out of reasons not to. There was a chair in the far left corner of the room, angled toward the fire that burned low in the hearth. She hadn't noticed the hearth at first. It was partially blocked by the angle of the door, and in the chair was a person. Caden Vale. She had heard descriptions of him, because descriptions of powerful men circulate in the buildings they inhabit regardless of whether anyone intends them to. He was tall, even sitting. Dark hair, not quite long, not quite short, the kind of length that happens when cutting it has not been a priority. A face that looked like it had been built for expression and then told to stop. He was dressed plainly, a gray shirt, dark trousers, nothing that announced rank, nothing that she would have been able to see in a crowd and think, that one is in charge of everything. He was looking at the fire. He did not look at her. 6 nights, he said, you haven't asked me a single question. I wasn't sure it was my place. Now he looked at her, dark eyes level, the kind of look that had probably frightened a great many people. On Sira, who had been frightened by enough things in her life to have developed a useful immunity to the performance of it, the look landed as something simpler, someone paying attention. Most people decide they know things about me without asking, he said. They fill in what they don't know with what they've been told. What have you been told about me? She asked, because she genuinely wanted to know. Something in his expression shifted barely. An unclaimed omega, night shift, quiet doesn't linger. That's accurate. Is it everything? She thought about it. No, but it's everything that matters for the job. He turned back to the fire. "Leave the tray, you can go." She left. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the south door close behind her, gently, with the precise click of something settling into its frame. She stood still for one moment and identified the thing she was feeling. Not fear, not the careful flatness she put on like a coat. Something smaller and more inconvenient than either of those things, a slight quickening, the internal equivalent of a lamp turned up from its lowest point. She turned it back down carefully and went to finish her shift. The following week was different from the one before it in small ways that added up to something larger. Every other night or so, the door was open and the tray went inside. She never spent more than 10 seconds in the room, set the tray, stand, leave, but 10 seconds is a long time if you're paying attention, and she was always paying attention. She learned the room in fragments. The map was of the 5-pack territories, and the colored lines on it were borders that had shifted. The desk was made of dark wood, old, with a surface so worn at the center that the grain had gone smooth. There were no decorations except a single shelf of books, and on the windowsill above the hearth, a small stone carving of an animal she couldn't quite identify from across the room. He spoke to her most nights, not much, sometimes one sentence. Once almost 5 minutes of something that was close to a conversation about the northern border roads and whether the stone was good for winter travel, and she had answered with the directness of someone who had, in fact, traveled a great deal of northern stone road in winter and had opinions about it. He listened when she answered, that was the thing. He did not look past her while she spoke, or give responses that proved he had been thinking of something else. He listened with the full attention of someone who was either very interested in road conditions or very interested in the experience of being listened to by someone who listened back. She thought it was probably the second thing. The servants knew something had shifted, though they did not know what. She could tell by the way the energy in the hall changed slightly when she walked in for dinner, not hostile, not warm but alert, the specific alertness of people who have been watching a slow fire and just noticed the flame change direction. The Omegas near the window looked at her for a fraction of a second longer than before. One of the kitchen workers asked her, very casually, how she was finding the night shift, and then watched her face very carefully when she answered. "Quiet," she said, "clean." "That's what they all say," the kitchen worker said and smiled and turned away. Sira did not ask what they all said after the first week. On the 15th night, she arrived at the top of the stairs and found the south door not just open but fully open, the entirety of the doorframe a rectangle of amber light, the room visible all at once for the first time, and Cadden Vale not in the chair by the fire but standing in the center of the room with his back to the door, looking at the map on the wall. She stopped at the threshold. "Should I come in?" he said without turning around. "Put the tray on the desk." She came in, she put the tray on the desk. She stood behind him at what she considered a reasonable distance and looked at the map because he was looking at it and because it was the most natural thing to look at. The borders were marked in 3 colors, red, green, and a kind of dark yellow that might have been gold once. The green borders were solid lines, the red ones were dotted in places, the yellow ones were dotted and then, in several spots, gone entirely, replaced with small marks that she thought might be question marks. "Something's changing," she said. She was not asking. "Everything is always changing," Cadden said. "The question is whether it's changing faster than you can manage." He paused. "The Eastern Territories." "The yellow border." She looked at the yellow border. It ran from the northeast corner of the map down and then sharply west, and in 3 places it was marked with those small, uncertain symbols. "Is it a problem?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "It will be." He turned then, finally, and she was standing closer to him than she had been in any of their previous interactions, not because she had moved but because he had turned, and the room had rearranged itself around the fact of him facing her. He was taller than the chair had made her think. The lamp light put shadows on the side of his face. He looked at her with the same level attention he always had. "You're not afraid of me," he said, not an accusation. Closer to an observation made by someone who had studied a thing for some time, and was finally giving the observation words. "No," she said. "Most Omegas are." "I know. Why aren't you?" She thought about this honestly. "Because the thing I'm afraid of," she said, "has already happened. The things after it are smaller." He held her gaze for a moment, and she saw something move through his expression that was too complex for her to name in full and too fast to catch entirely. except that it involved something recognizing something else, the way two people who have been walking in the same direction realize they are on the same road. Then it was gone, his face settled back into its usual even lines. "Leave the tray," he said, "you can go." She went. She was down the corridor, and on the stairs before the feeling caught up to her, the one she had been careful not to name since the night of the first conversation. She named it now briefly to herself, and then she put it in the same corner where she had put the sound from that first rainy night, and she went downstairs to finish her shift. Whatever it was, she thought, it did not change the job. The job was still the mop, the tray, the polished brackets. That was what she was here for. That was what she had agreed to. She reminded herself of this firmly. She reminded herself of this the whole walk back to her room. She was not sure it was working. Maid. She found out about the decree the same way she found out about most things that happened inside the fortress walls that were not her direct business. She overheard it. It was not intentional. She was in the linen storage room on the second floor at 1:30 in the morning, returning the folded cloths from the cleaning cart to their proper shelves, when two voices stopped in the corridor directly outside the closed door. She recognized neither of them. One was male, low, the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering information that required careful handling. The other was male too, older, and taut in a way that reminded her of bowstrings. "When did he issue it?" the older voice said. "This morning," verbally to the entire corridor guard. "Written confirmation was sent to my office by 8. A decree about the maid. About the night shift worker, he didn't specify the position. He didn't have to." A pause. The older voice had something in it now that was not quite anger and not quite fear but shared qualities with both. Orin heard it. Orin, Callum, and 2 of the day rotation who were passing through. There is no question of the wording. "Say it again." A beat of silence, then flatly, as if reading from a document, "Wake the Omega maid sleeping on my chest and you die." The linen room did not move. The shelves stayed where they were. The folded cloths remained stacked in Syrah's hands. But something in the world rearranged itself around that sentence in a way that had nothing to do with the physical properties of rooms, and everything to do with the particular kind of stillness that arrives when you have heard something that your brain has not yet finished processing. "He said sleeping," the older voice said. "Yes, on his chest." That is the reported wording. Silence. Syrah stood very still between the shelves. "When did this happen?" the older voice said, and now it had shifted fully into something that was, at its core, fear disguised as authority. "Based on the timing and the guard rotations, sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning." And nobody, the older voice stopped, restarted, and the girl was unharmed. "Completely." She reported to her regular duties this morning, polished the East Wing corridor at the standard time, nothing unusual. "Does she know about the decree?" A pause. "We don't believe so." Syrah set the cloths very gently on the shelf and stood in the dark linen room and thought, with great methodical care, about what she actually knew to be true. She knew that she had not been sleeping on anyone's chest. She knew that she had never entered the south chamber room for longer than the 10 seconds required to set down a tray. She knew that she had last spoken to Cadden Vale 3 nights ago, a 2-minute conversation about supply routes that she had left as she always left, walking backward into the corridor, hands empty, door closed behind her. She also knew that she had never reached the night in question, the one the voices were discussing, because she could not place it on any timeline she could verify. 3 nights ago she had left the chamber at 1:15. She had mopped the north section of the corridor. She had gone to the linen room on the second floor and then, without stopping, straight down to the kitchen for the end-of-shift hour, at which point she had stood in the warmth of the residual oven heat and eaten a piece of bread and then gone to her room. She could account for every minute. Which meant that either the decree was about something she did not remember, which seemed unlikely given the unusual nature of what was being described, or the decree was about something she did not know had happened. The voices in the corridor moved on, their footsteps faded toward the east staircase. Syrah stood in the linen room for another full minute. Then she shelved the last of the cloths, turned off the small lamp, opened the door, and walked back toward the servants' staircase as if the corridor were entirely ordinary and the ground beneath her feet had not just shifted in a direction she hadn't expected. She did not know what to do with the information, so she did what she always did with things she didn't yet know how to handle. She filed it away in the back of her mind, where it would sit until she had enough surrounding context to make sense of it, and she finished her shift. She slept fitfully until mid-morning. When she woke, the quality of the silence in the servants' wing had changed. She noticed it the way you notice when a sound you've gotten used to stops, not the sound itself but its absence. The other Omegas who shared the East Wing corridor were quieter than usual. A door that usually opened at 9 o'clock had not opened. The woman in the room next to Sira's, who had a habit of humming something tuneless while she dressed, was not humming. Sira went to breakfast. The hall was the same as always and completely different. Nobody looked at her directly. Nobody avoided looking at her directly. The middle space between those two things was where every eye in the room lived, which is how you look at someone when you are not supposed to be looking at them and also cannot help it. She got her food. She sat at the end of the table. She ate. Halfway through the meal, one of the Omegas from the window table, a woman named Nell, who had been here for 3 years and had the particular self-contained quality of someone who had made her peace with a small world and intended to keep it small and peaceful, came and sat across from Sira without asking. "You've heard," Nell said. "Yes," Sira said, because there was no useful purpose served by pretending otherwise. "Are you frightened?" Sira considered the question with the same honesty she applied to all questions worth answering. "I don't understand enough of it to know what to be frightened of." Nell folded her hands on the table in front of her. She had small hands, worn at the knuckles, the hands of someone who had been doing physical work since they were young. "When the king issues a decree about a person," she said carefully, "it usually means one of two things." "Tell me both." "The first is that the person is under his protection, formally, which means anyone who moves against them has moved against him. And the second—" Nell's expression was the careful blankness of someone stepping across uncertain ice. "The second is that the person knows something, or has seen something, and the decree is a way of making sure that everyone around them understands that any attempt to address the situation through the person will be treated as a direct challenge." Sira sat with both options. Neither one was comfortable. Neither one was the same as dangerous, exactly, though both had the potential to become it. "Do you know which it is?" she asked. Nell looked at her hands. "I think for it to be either one, something happened that neither side of it has fully explained. The decree was issued at 6 in the morning. The guard it was issued to said the king looked," she paused, choosing a word, "composed, not angry, not making a threat, just stating a fact." "The way he does everything," Sira said quietly. Nell looked at her. There was something in that look, not suspicion, not exactly, but a recalibration, the look of someone adjusting the model they had been using to understand a situation. "You know how he does things," she said. "A little. From the night shifts." "Yes." Nell was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Be careful, not because of him, because of the people around him who are going to spend the next week trying to understand what this decree means and where you fit in it. Those people are the ones who are actually dangerous." Sira nodded, "Thank you." Nell stood, smoothed her apron, and went back to the window table without another word. That night Sira arrived at the 3rd floor at midnight and found Orin, the corridor guard, standing at the top of the stairs instead of mid-round. He was a large man, Orin, with a face built for weather and a disposition that had adapted accordingly. He looked at her with no particular expression. "Evening," he said. "Good evening." He stepped slightly to the side so she could access the cart. He did not leave. She began her preparations, checked the mop, checked the cloths, reviewed the tray, and was aware the entire time that he was watching her with the contained attention of a man who had been given no instructions about watching her but had decided to do it anyway. "Was there something you needed?" she asked without turning around. "No," he said. She turned around and looked at him. "You're standing at the top of the stairs." "I am." "You usually start your round at the south end and come back." He looked at her, she looked at him. After a moment that contained a great deal of careful information exchange without either of them saying anything, he nodded once, almost to himself, and walked to the south end of the corridor and began his round. She took the cart to the north end and began mopping. The south door, when she reached it, was closed. She set the tray at the bracket, waited the 2 seconds it took to confirm no instruction was coming from the other side, and turned to go back. The door opened. Not slowly, not hesitantly. It swung open with the kind of purpose that belonged to people who made decisions quickly and committed to them. Cadden Vale stood in the doorframe, and he looked the same as he always looked except for one thing that Sira clocked immediately. He was watching the corridor behind her, checking her approach path, and then the stairs before he looked at her directly. He was checking whether she was alone. "Come in," he said. She came in, the door closed behind her. She stood in the center of the room and waited, because she had learned by this point that waiting was usually the right thing, that he arranged his words the way he arranged the papers on his desk, not slowly but with a specific care that could read as slow if you were impatient. "You've heard the decree," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He moved to the desk, but he did not sit. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at the papers there. "I want to explain it." "You don't owe me an explanation." "No, but I'm giving one anyway." He looked up from the papers. "3 nights ago you left the tray and went back downstairs. That's what happened from your side." She thought about the night he meant. "Yes." "From my side," he said evenly, with the care of someone building something precise, "something I have been managing for 4 years stopped being manageable. It happens. It's infrequent, but it happens, and I have a system for managing it that works. The system is, I manage it alone." She waited. That night the thing I have a system for arrived without adequate notice, and the management system did not engage. He paused. "I was found at some point in the corridor, by you apparently, though you were not supposed to be in the corridor at that hour." Sira thought about her shift. She had finished the south end of the corridor and gone back to the cart, and then she had gone to the linen room on the 2nd floor. Except she was remembering now a specific thing. She had gone to the 2nd floor and then realized she had left a cloth at the top of the stairs, folded on the cart shelf, that belonged with the 2nd floor linens, not the 3rd, and she had gone back up for it. She had gone back to the 3rd floor corridor. She must have seen the door, she must have stopped. She did not remember any of what came after. She did not remember entering the room, or the corridor, or anything between the moment she reached the top of the stairs and the moment she found herself in the kitchen eating bread. "I don't remember it," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not unusual for an omega with your specific," he paused, "configuration. The state I was in is sometimes described as the gray. It produces a partial effect on anyone nearby, a kind of temporary disconnection. It's not harmful. You woke up fine the following morning." She processed this, and during this time I was asleep, he said. "On the chair beside me. You fell asleep. I didn't move you." He stopped. "I should have woken you and sent you back downstairs. I did not do that." Another pause. "I don't have an explanation for that decision that would satisfy a rational inquiry." Sira looked at him. He was looking at the desk papers again, not at her, with the precise blankness of someone who has laid out a set of facts and has now run out of facts and is standing in the space on the other side of them. "The decree," she said, "was a reflex, not a political calculation." He looked at her now directly. 3 people walked that corridor before dawn. Any of them waking you in that specific moment would have." He stopped. "It would have been unkind." She held that sentence. An alpha king who controlled 5 packs and managed things alone, and had a system that was supposed to keep everything contained, had looked at a maid asleep on a chair beside him, and decided that waking her would be unkind. And then he had told 3 guards, and through them, the entire fortress, that waking her was an act punishable by death. She thought about the 2 options Nell had given her this morning, protection or threat management. She thought both of them might be slightly wrong. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Nothing different," he said. "The decree stays. You do your shift. Anyone who has a problem with the situation will understand the situation without being told." "And the gray," she said. "If it happens again." "It won't," he said, with a finality that she recognized as the kind of thing people said when they were not entirely sure it was true, but had committed to being sure about it anyway. She nodded. She picked up the tray from where she'd set it on the desk and moved to leave. At the door she stopped, not because she had planned to, but because something compelled her to, some sense that the full picture had not yet come through. "You could have woken me yourself," she said, "if it was just about being kind." He was quiet long enough that she almost let herself out. "Yes," he said, "I could have." She went back to her shift. Oren had returned to his regular route. He passed her twice in the north corridor and both times maintained his studied blankness. She mopped, she polished, she folded cloths, and she thought about a man who ran 5 packs and managed everything alone, and had sat in a dark room beside a sleeping woman he barely knew for reasons he couldn't explain to a rational inquiry. She also thought about the word he had used, the gray, the way he had said it, not like a condition, not with shame, but with the flat familiarity of naming something that had lived in him long enough to have a name. She was very carefully not thinking about the other thing, the thing she had heard in his voice when he said she could have woken me yourself. The way the sentence had cost him something small and specific, the way any honest answer costs something when the person giving it has not been in the habit of honest answers for a very long time. She finished her shift. She went downstairs. She walked past the kitchen and the bread smell and all the way to her room, and she sat on the bed and looked at the strip of sky in the window and thought, with great deliberateness, about what exactly she had walked into when she walked into this fortress. She was not sure yet. She knew it was not nothing. Maid. Nobody had asked Sira for her story in a long time. That was not an accident. She had shaped her life in the years after her pack released her into a form that did not present obvious spaces for questions. She answered what was asked. She offered nothing extra. She kept her hands busy and her expressions neutral and her presence in any given room at the precise level that kept her useful without making her interesting. It had worked very well. The people she had worked for and worked with had mostly remained comfortable with a version of her that was defined entirely by the tasks she completed. The Omega girl who mopped the floors, the night worker who left the trays, a function in human clothing. It was easier that way for everyone. She had been here for 3 weeks when Cadden Vale looked at her across his desk. She had brought the tray inside, as she did most nights now, and he had looked up from the map he was reviewing and said, "You're from the Northern River Valley." She stopped. "How do you know that?" "Your vowels, the way you say road and stone, it's faint but it's there." He turned back to the map. "Which pack?" She set the tray down with more precision than required. "The Holton territory." He was quiet for a moment. She knew, in the way you know things when you work in the household of a powerful man, that he had extensive knowledge of every pack in the north, their leadership, their lineage, their current status. That he would know Holton. That knowing Holton and looking at her in the same thought would produce a certain mathematical result. "They disbanded," he said, not a question. 6 years ago." She moved toward the door. "How old were you?" 16. He looked at her then, and this time the look had something in it that she had not seen from him before, not quite recognition, not quite sympathy, something closer to the involuntary and honest response that crosses a person's face when a number lands differently than expected. "That's young," he said. "I know," she said and left. She thought about it afterward, in her room, in the precise way she had learned to think about things from her past, systematically, with the specific goal of understanding them as facts rather than as wounds. The Holton pack had been a mid-sized northern territory, not wealthy, not poor, held together for 3 generations by an alpha bloodline that had run thin by the time it reached her generation. The alpha's second son had been the nominal pack leader since she was 14, a man named Goran, who had all the posture of authority and none of the instinct for it, who had made decisions the way a person plays a game they don't understand by following rules they've memorized without knowing their purpose. When her wolf had not fully emerged at the expected time, 16 was late, but not unheard of, and even a partial emergence could indicate eventual full manifestation. Goran had not waited to find out. He had done the calculation that an incomplete Omega represented more cost than benefit, handed her a small amount of coin, and pointed at the road. She had taken the coin. She had walked the road. She had not looked back, not because she felt nothing about looking back, but because she had decided on the first mile that the direction of her feet was what mattered, and her feet were pointing forward. What she carried from Holton was not grief exactly. It was something more precise than grief, the specific knowledge of what she was worth to the kind of people who measured worth in those particular units. The knowledge was useful. It told her how to navigate. It told her which spaces were safe and which would eventually run out. It told her this was the thing she had spent the most time with, that her worth and her value were different calculations, and the second one was the one she was responsible for managing herself. She had spent 6 years being very disciplined about this. On the fourth week, Cadden Vale stopped sending her away at the end of the tray delivery. It was not a formal invitation to stay. There was no point at which he said, "Please remain." What happened instead was a slow series of conversations that neither of them appeared to have planned, conversations that arose from the materials of the room, the map, the documents on the desk, a book he was reading when she arrived one night and that she looked at long enough for him to offer the title, and that lasted 5 minutes or 10, or on one occasion close to 40 before either of them noticed. She noticed he did not ask her personal questions unless she had offered the door first. He seemed to understand, without being told, that she kept her history behind a specific kind of reserve that was not coldness but was not openness either, and that the reserve was there because she had built it with considerable care and needed it intact to function. He asked her instead about what she knew, which was a different thing, what she knew about northern roads and winter passage, what she knew about mixed-rank settlements, the ones that existed in the territory gaps where pack law didn't fully reach, what she knew about the kinds of informal leadership structures that emerged in those places, the hierarchies that built themselves without official sanction. She knew a great deal about all of these things because she had lived in them. He listened with the particular quality of attention she had noticed from the first conversation, the kind that did not merely wait for its turn to speak. He asked clarifying questions. He connected what she said to things he already knew, quickly, efficiently, the way a mind that has been organizing information for a long time connects new data to existing structures. Once or twice he offered things back, not personal things, not the kind of disclosure she might have traded in exchange, but occasional windows into the thinking of someone managing a territory at scale. The problem of border settlements that wanted pack protections without pack obligations. The particular frustration of mediating between alpha temperaments when neither party had the capacity to back down and both parties were actually, objectively, in the wrong. She found, to her surprise, that she had opinions about these things. She had not known she had opinions about alpha governance and territory management. But apparently 6 years of living in the spaces that governance left behind had given her perspective that was useful to someone who managed the governance itself. She did not offer her opinions unprompted, but when he asked, and he did ask, with a directness that she had come to understand was simply how he operated, no ornamentation, no ceremony, she gave them. She was in the middle of an explanation of why river-crossing settlements tended to form their own informal Omega councils, and why those councils were more effective at preventing territorial disputes than the official pack mediators who visited twice a year, when she realized that she had been standing in the center of his room for 25 minutes and had forgotten that there was anywhere else to be. She stopped mid-sentence. "Sorry," she said, "I've been standing here a long time." "You don't have to apologize for that. I should get back to." "Sit down if you want," he said. It was not quite a command and not quite an offer. It landed somewhere in the middle, a statement of permission given by someone who was unaccustomed to giving permission for small things because he usually gave permission for large ones. She looked at the chair by the fire, the chair she now knew he used during the gray, though he had not mentioned it again and she had not asked. There was a smaller chair on the other side of the hearth, plain, with a cushion that had been used enough to lose most of its shape. She sat in the small chair. He looked at her for a moment, and she had the distinct impression that this too was a first, not her sitting down, but the room containing two people sitting, the fire between them, with no obvious task and no reason for either of them to be anywhere else at this particular moment. He looked at the fire. She looked at the fire. After a while she said, very quietly, "The River Council model works because the Omegas in those settlements are managing the same territories their parents managed, sometimes their grandparents. They know the land the way the official pack mediators don't. The mediators arrive twice a year and they know the rules. The Omegas know the flood seasons." He was quiet. Then, the people with the least formal authority are often the ones with the most useful knowledge. "Yes," she said. "That's a structural problem. It's a very old structural problem." He glanced at her. There was something in his expression that she was starting to be able to read, not fully, not the way you read someone you have known for years, but in rough translation. What she read now was something close to appreciation, not gratitude exactly, something that recognized its own reflection. "I didn't plan this," he said, meaning the conversation, meaning the hour. "Neither did I. You could have left." She looked at the fire. Yes, she said, I could have. They did not say anything else for a while. The fire settled. Outside, the rain that had been threatening for 3 nights finally arrived. A soft patter on the high windows, not the thin, persistent kind, but something fuller and more decisive. You never told me, he said eventually, why you came here specifically. To this fortress. There are other postings. She thought about how to answer that with the level of truth it deserved, without giving more than she wanted to. I heard that the night shift on the 3rd floor was difficult to fill, she said. I heard it paid more than equivalent positions. That's the practical reason. Those tend to be the ones I have. He was quiet, she did not elaborate. After a moment he said, the difficulty isn't the hours. I know. You knew when you applied. Yes, she paused. Places that are difficult for the wrong reasons are sometimes exactly right for people with certain qualities. He looked at her, and what qualities are those? The ones, she said, that make you good at existing in rooms where someone is working very hard at something invisible. The fire made its sound, the rain made its sound. Neither of them said anything for long enough that the silence became comfortable, which was a thing that happened, she had learned, when 2 people stopped performing and let themselves be in the same room. Eventually she stood. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She left. She mopped the last section of the corridor with the specific kind of thoroughness she applied when her mind was elsewhere, and she thought about 6 years on northern stone roads, and a man who managed everything alone, and a fire that was warm enough for 2 chairs. She thought about the thing she had said, places that are difficult for the wrong reasons are sometimes exactly right for certain people, and she recognized, with the clear-eyed honesty she tried to apply to herself as well as to situations, that she had not been describing a principle. She had been describing herself. She had come here because something in the advertisement, the difficulty, the specific nature of the post, the fact that it was unfillable for reasons nobody would explain, had pulled at the part of her that had always, quietly and without making much noise about it, been looking for a place that matched the shape of what she was carrying. She had not expected to find a man who was also carrying something. She had not expected to find that carrying things in the same room as someone else could feel, even briefly, like setting them down. She went to her room, she lay down, she looked at the narrow sky in the window. The rain fell on the stone fortress of Cadden Vale, and on everything inside it, and for the first time in a very long time, Sira did not fall asleep thinking about where she would go next. She was thinking about where she already was. 2 days later, Lady Murha arrived at the fortress. Sira did not see her arrive. She was asleep during the midday hours when the carriages came through the main gate, but she heard about it with the speed and thoroughness that characterized all significant news inside the servants' wing. The word was not gossip, exactly. It moved with the flat precision of people reporting a weather event. Something has arrived, it is significant, here are the observable facts. Lady Murha was 28. She was the daughter of the Alpha who led the Eastern Reach Pack, the oldest and wealthiest of the 5 allied territories. She had been at the fortress twice before in the last 2 years. Each time the visit had lasted 3 days and had concluded without formal announcement of any kind, which the servants' hall had interpreted, correctly, Sira suspected, as neither a success nor a failure, but a continuation of a longer conversation about something neither party had finished deciding. Nell appeared at the end of the dinner table that evening, with the expressionless expression of someone delivering information they were choosing to treat as neutral. She'll be here a week, Nell said, sitting down uninvited, which Sira had come to understand was Nell's way of indicating that the information was for Sira's benefit and required her full attention. All right, Sira said. She has rooms on the 2nd floor, day schedule, she won't be in the corridor at night. I didn't think she would be. Nell looked at her. The council is formally pleased about the visit, which means someone arranged it. Sira ate a bite of her food. What does the council want? What they always want, Nell said. Order, certainty, an arrangement that they can plan around. The king has been, she paused, not forthcoming on that front for some time. Sira did not say anything. The decree, Nell said carefully, has been read in certain quarters as an indication of instability, of sentiment overriding judgment. She paused again. Lady Murha's visit is, in those same quarters, understood as a corrective measure. Sira set her fork down. She understood all of this. She understood it very clearly. She understood that she was the sentiment, that the visit was the correction, and that the quarters Nell was describing were the people who managed the king's court and needed his life to move in predictable directions. "She's not dangerous to me," Sira said. "Not directly," Nell agreed. "She has, however, already submitted a request to Edna for a full review of the domestic staff schedule." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that she is a guest of significant standing and has observations about the household's current organization." Sira looked at her plate. "Edna will handle it." "Edna," Nell said, "is a very good housekeeper who has worked in this fortress for 18 years and who is also, when the occasion demands it, an extremely practical woman. She has already noted to me that the current schedule is optimal for the household's needs and does not require review." She folded her hands. "But she also noted that a request from Lady Murha's family directly to the council, rather than to household management, would require a different kind of response." Sira looked up. She'd go above Edna's level. "If she understood the mechanism well enough, yes." "Does she?" Nell's expression said everything her words carefully didn't. Sira pushed her plate aside and thought about it with the same methodical clarity she applied to everything that arrived as a problem before it fully became one. She was not angry. Anger was a response that required investing in the belief that you deserved better, and she had learned long ago that investing in that belief before you had confirmed it was sustainable was a reliable way to lose everything when the accounting came due. What she felt instead was something more like the alertness she had felt on the first night, the cataloging of exits and rhythms and rules. A new element had entered the building. She needed to understand it correctly. "She's not wrong," Sira said finally. Nell looked at her. "About the situation, from where she's standing, it's strange. An Omega Maid with a royal decree attached to her name, night shift hours and access to a corridor that most senior staff have never been on." She looked at Nell. "If I were her, I'd investigate too." Nell was quiet for a moment. "Most people in your position," she said, "would be worried." "Most people in my position," Sira said, "haven't spent 6 years living in places where being worried costs more than being useful." She picked her fork back up. The food was getting cold. She ate it cold. That night at midnight, the south corridor was closed and the tray went to the bracket, and Oren made his rounds without incident. Sira finished her shift, collected the cloths, returned the cart, and was at the foot of the stairs heading back to the east wing when she found herself thinking about the stone carving on the windowsill in the king's chamber, the one she had never been close enough to identify. She thought about a visit that had been arranged as a corrective measure. She thought about a man who had not been forthcoming on certain fronts for some time. She thought, "This is not my story to be in the middle of." Then she went to her room, and she lay on her back in the dark, and she thought about it for a very long time anyway, in the precise and careful way she thought about things that had stopped being abstract. Lady Murha had the kind of beauty that announced itself from across a room, and then, when you got closer, turned out to have architecture behind it. Not just features, but the particular construction of someone who had been raised knowing that beauty was a resource and had administered it accordingly. The posture, the delivery, the precise management of where she looked and when and for how long. Sira saw her from the east corridor on the second morning of the visit in passing and was struck by the efficiency of it. She was not surprised. She had met women like Murha before in various capacities, and she had always found them interesting in the way that well-designed systems were interesting, not warm exactly but worthy of study. Murha looked at Sira once briefly and then looked past her, which was a choice that told Sira two things. First, Murha had already been given a physical description. Second, she was skilled enough not to react to the thing she had been given the description of. These were not bad qualities. Sira filed them away. The schedule review came through Edna's office on the third day of the visit. Edna sent a note to Sira via the internal message basket, a small wooden box mounted at the base of the east staircase where notes circulated between the domestic levels that said only, "My office this afternoon 4 o'clock." Sira was there at 4. Edna's office was the same as always, organized, practical, slightly warm from the small brazier in the corner that Edna ran regardless of season because she said her hands needed the heat. Edna herself was sitting behind her desk with the posture of a person who had already decided something and was now delivering the decision. "The schedule review," Edna said without preamble, because that was how Edna operated. Lady Murha's household coordinator submitted a request for adjustment to the third-floor night rotation. "On what grounds?" Sira asked, which was the same question she had asked Nell, except this time the answer would be the official one. "On the grounds that the current assignment represents a structural irregularity." Edna folded her hands. "Specifically, that an Omega worker with an incomplete wolf status has no documented reason to hold a solo night assignment on a secured floor." "What's the documented reason for any assignment?" "Need and suitability," Edna said. "The third-floor assignment has both. I have documented this. My documentation is accurate and has been submitted to the council office with a note from myself explaining the operational necessity." She paused. "The question I am asking you is not whether your assignment will survive the review." "What is the question?" Sira asked. Edna looked at her directly. Edna rarely looked at anyone directly for extended periods. It was one of her efficiencies. She gathered information in quick, precise glances and processed it internally. When she held a gaze, it meant something she was assessing required more than a glance. "The question," Edna said, "is what you want." Sira met her gaze. "I want the posting, I want the work." "You want this specific posting, on the third floor on the night shift?" "Yes." Edna held her gaze for another moment. Then she looked down at the papers on her desk, made a small notation in the margin of the top sheet and said, "All right. The schedule stands." Sira stood to leave. "One more thing," Edna said, still looking at her papers. "The coordinator submitted a secondary request for an inventory of the third-floor corridor contents. What's left on the cleaning cart between shifts, the tray schedule, the bracket log." Sira stopped. "That's detailed." "It is." Edna still did not look up. "It's also technically within the scope of a guest coordinator's administrative review rights." She paused. "I submitted the bracket log. It shows trays delivered and collected. It does not distinguish between bracket delivery and interior delivery because the bracket log does not make that distinction." She was protecting the record. Sira understood this without Edna needing to say it. "Thank you," Sira said. "I'm not doing anything," Edna said. "The log is accurate. I cannot be thanked for accuracy." Sira left. She went back to the east wing and sat on her bed and thought about the shape of what was forming around her. It was not complicated exactly. It was the kind of situation that was complicated if you were surprised by it and manageable if you were not. Lady Murha was doing what anyone in her position would do, gathering information, identifying variables, applying pressure through legitimate channels to see what held and what moved. So far what held? The schedule, the assignment, Edna's documentation, the guards observed silence. What moved? The fact that the inquiry existed at all. The fact that someone with enough authority to submit a schedule review request had decided Sira was worth the process of a schedule review. That was not neutral, that was a message. It said, "I am paying attention." Sira went to her shift that night with the particular quality of focus she saved for situations that required it. The corridor was quiet, same as always. Oren's rounds were regular. The south door was ajar when she reached it, more than a sliver, enough for a voice to come through comfortably. "The coordinator submitted paperwork," Cadden said from inside. She pushed the door open and carried the tray inside. "I know." Edna handled it. "I know she did." He was at the desk, papers spread, not looking at the map tonight but at something denser, columns of figures, correspondence. The review was not Murha's idea. Sira set the tray down. Whose was it? "Councilman Dren." He did not look up from the papers. "He's been on the council for 11 years. He's good at his work. And he has a specific theory about the correct management of situations that he considers irregularities." "He sees me as an irregularity." "He sees the decree as one." Cadden turned a page. "The decree is attached to you, so in practical terms, yes." Sira stood at the edge of the desk and thought about this. What does he want? "Order," Cadden said. "The same thing everyone wants. He wants things to proceed along expected lines. He wants the visit with Murha to produce an expected outcome. He wants the third-floor assignment to be reassigned to someone whose presence he can explain." He set down the page and looked at her. He is not wrong about any of these preferences in the abstract. "But," she said, He held her gaze, but the abstract is not where any of us currently live. She pulled the plain chair from the corner without asking. She had stopped asking 2 weeks ago, and he had stopped registering the motion as something that needed response, and sat down. If Murha's visit produces the expected outcome, she said carefully, what does that mean for the decree? The decree stands regardless, he said. It is not conditional on Murha or the council or Dren's expectations. I'm asking what happens to the person the decree is attached to. He was quiet for a moment. The lamp on the desk threw a yellow circle across the papers and the edge of the map on the wall and the near side of his face, leaving the rest in shadow. Decrees exist, he said slowly, to make clear that certain decisions have been made, not proposed, not under review, made. Yes, she said. The question of what happens to the person attached to the decree is the same question as what happens to anyone I've formally included in my household. I'm not formally included in your household, she said. I'm a night shift maid on a 6-week trial contract. He looked at her. Yes, he said. And the decree applies to you anyway. The fire made its sound. She looked at the lamp. She was thinking about Nell's 2 options, protection or threat management, and she was thinking that neither of them had been exactly right, and she was thinking that the third option, the one Nell had not offered, was the one that actually required the most from her to understand. The council will push back, she said. Dren will keep submitting requests. Yes, Murha will be here a week, and nothing formal will happen, and she'll leave, and the council will have another conversation about expected outcomes. Probably. She looked at him. What do you want? It was not a question she had asked him directly before. She had asked about situations, about territory problems, about the mechanics of things. She had not asked him what he wanted, because that was a question of a different type, one that required a different kind of permission to answer than the ones they had been asking each other. He met her gaze. His expression did the thing it sometimes did, not closing exactly but slowing, as if taking an extra beat before each piece of it engaged. To manage this fortress well, he said, to keep the pack stable, to handle what comes. It was a complete answer. It was also not the whole answer, and she could tell by the way he said it, the slight deliberateness, the extra beat, that he knew she could tell. She did not push. That was not how they operated. All right, she said. She stayed another 20 minutes. They talked about the eastern border, the yellow lines on the map that were becoming more question mark than line, and she told him what she knew about the kind of informal power structures that formed in contested territories, the kind of leadership that existed in the gaps, and he listened and asked 2 questions that were better questions than the ones most people asked, and she answered both of them. When she stood to leave, he did not say anything about the council or the coordinator or Murha. Neither did she. She said good night. He said good night. She went back to the corridor and finished her shift with the focused efficiency of someone who has been given a lot to think about, and is choosing to think about it through the motion of physical tasks. On the 5th day of Murha's visit, the formal request arrived not through Edna, but through the council office directly. It was addressed to the household management in formal council language, which meant it was not a request in any functional sense but an instruction. The instruction was for a review of the irregular assignment on the 3rd floor corridor, with particular attention to the question of whether the assigned worker's status, incomplete Omega classification, no registered pack affiliation, met the standard required for service in proximity to a high alpha residence. It was not technically addressed to Sira, it was addressed to Edna. Edna sent Sira a 1-line note, "Come to my office when you wake." Sira went at 3 in the afternoon. Edna handed her the document without comment and let her read it. Sira read it twice, the way she read anything with legal language, once for the surface and once for the structure underneath. The structure underneath was very clear. Dren was not using Murha. He was using the visit as cover for something he had been wanting to do anyway. The visit gave him a reason, but the reason was not the reason. She set the document on Edna's desk. "What are my options?" she asked. "You can submit a written response through the domestic office," Edna said. "You can request a formal status review from the council, which would require documenting your wolf classification through a registered assessor, or you can appeal directly to the household authority." Sira looked at her. "The household authority." "The king," Edna said, with the flatness of someone naming an obvious thing. "I'm not going to do that," Sira said. Edna raised one eyebrow, not dramatically, about 2 millimeters. "Why not?" "Because it would make everything that had built between them into a transaction. Because she would not use whatever she was to him as a tool to preserve her position. Because her position needed to be able to stand on its own, or it wasn't worth having." "Because the first two options are sufficient," she said. Edna held her gaze for a moment. "A status review takes time, and the council can continue to issue interference requests during the review period. Then I'll handle those individually. They may become extensive." "I can handle extensive," Sira said. "I've been handling extensive since I was 16. Edna's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, the expression of someone who has a full and complex response to a thing and is choosing to compress it into a single almost gesture. "All right," she said. She pulled the document back across the desk and made a notation in the top margin. "I'll process the formal response through the domestic office. The status review request will be filed with the council assessor's office by end of day." Sarah stood. "Thank you." "I'm doing my job," Edna said. "You're welcome." She went back to her room. She sat on the bed. She thought about everything. She had not appealed to Cadden. She had not used the decree or the access or any of the fragile and unnamed thing that had accumulated in that room over the past weeks. She had gone through the proper channels. She had done it herself. It was the right choice. She was sure of it. She was also sitting on her narrow bed in the east wing with the afternoon light coming through the window at its low angle, absolutely tired of being the kind of person who made all the right choices alone. She let herself be tired of it for exactly 5 minutes. Then she stood up and went to prepare for her shift. Mirha came to the 3rd floor at 11:45 that night. Not the corridor. Sira had not started her shift yet, and the corridor was Oren's territory between shifts. She came to the servants' staircase landing, where the east and west wings met, and she stood with the particular composed stillness of someone who had arrived at a location they had thought about arriving at for some time. Sira had been on her way up. They stopped 5 feet apart. Mirha was taller up close than across a room. She was wearing a night robe over her clothes, a deliberately casual choice that Sira recognized as its own kind of armor. The message was, "I'm not making this official. This is a private conversation between 2 women in a stairwell." "You're the night worker," Mirha said. "Yes. I've asked about you." "I couldn't get a clear answer from anyone." She paused. "That's unusual." "People don't know much about me," Sira said. "I've only been here a few weeks." Mirha looked at her with the level, assessing look of someone who was very good at assessing and knew it. "What they don't know," she said, "isn't the same as what they're not telling me." Sira held her gaze. "Is there something you want to ask me directly?" A pause. Mirha's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something in it becoming briefly less managed. "What is it that you have?" she said, and the question was quiet and genuine in a way that the rest of the conversation had not been. Not hostile, something closer to honest. Sira considered her answer. She thought about all the ways she could respond, deflect, minimize, ask for clarification she didn't actually need. She rejected all of them. "I don't know yet," she said, which was the truth. Mirha looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded once very slightly. "He has been in that room alone for 4 years, she said. "No one gets close, no one gets more than an audience." She paused. "Whatever it is you have, it is not nothing." "No," Sira said, "it's not." Mirha straightened slightly. The managed quality returned to her expression, not unkindly, just the way a professional resumes a professional stance. "The council review will proceed," she said. "I want you to understand that's not something I instructed. Dren operates independently." "I know. But I also won't stop it. I didn't expect you to." Another pause, then Mirha said something that Sira had not expected. "He never used the word protection about anything the entire time I've known him. He uses the word management. He says managing the way other people say caring for. It's his word for things that matter." She looked at Sira directly. "The decree did not use the word management." She walked back toward the 2nd floor corridor without waiting for a response. Sira stood on the staircase landing for a moment, holding what had just been handed to her, not an accusation, not a threat, but a piece of information delivered by a woman who had decided, for her own reasons that Sira deserved to have it. Then she went up to the third floor and started her shift. She mopped the corridor twice that night, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked through what Mirha had given her. The decree did not use the word management. She thought about the first night she had heard the decree repeated back to her in the linen room between two voices she didn't know. The exact words, delivered flat by a man reading from a document: "Wake the Omega Maid sleeping on my chest and you die." She had spent weeks understanding the decree as something external to her, a decree about a situation, a response to a set of circumstances that she had stumbled into through accident and corridor geometry. Mirha had just told her, carefully, indirectly, in the way that powerful women delivered important things when they had decided to deliver them, that the decree was not about a situation. It was about her. Sira wrung the mop into the bucket at the north end of the corridor and stood there in the quiet lamplight and took this information apart the way she took apart everything important, methodically, piece by piece, not allowing herself to rush to the center of it before she had understood the edges. Caden Vale had been managing things alone for 4 years. He had a system. He had language for it, the gray management, handling, that he had developed in the specific way people develop language for things they have lived with long enough to need names for them. He had not, in 4 years, issued a decree about anyone. He had issued one about her. Not because she had done something extraordinary, not because she had a remarkable wolf or a formal status or a place in any hierarchy that made her worth the gesture. She was an Omega with an incomplete spirit and a 6-week trial contract and a mop. She stood at the north end of the corridor and looked at the south door. She was not going to make this into something it might not be. She was not going to take Mirha's observation and build a structure out of it that collapsed the moment she put weight on it. She had built things on insufficient foundations before, and she knew the exact texture of that kind of collapse. But she was also, she decided, not going to pretend that Mirha had handed her nothing. She was going to sit with it, carefully, the way she sat with everything that mattered. She finished the corridor, she returned the cart, she went downstairs. And she thought with great deliberateness and honesty that 4 years was a very long time to be in a room alone, and that some things, by the time they had been carried alone for 4 years, had stopped being manageable in the precise way that word was meant. She had known that already. She had felt it in the corridor that first rainy night, in the sound that came through the open door. She had known it the way her incomplete, cracked, persistent little wolf had pressed forward in the dark and known it before she did. She thought, I don't know what this is yet. She thought, but I am not pretending any more that it is nothing. She went asleep. She slept better than she had in weeks. Maid. Mirha left on the 7th day. No ceremony, no formal announcement. 2 carriages through the main gate at mid-morning, the small flag of the Eastern Reach folded and packed, and then the specific kind of absence that powerful people leave when they go, a brief readjustment of the air pressure in the building, a faint recalibration of everyone who had been performing a slightly different version of themselves for the duration of the visit. Sira watched the carriages from the east wing window, not because she was looking for anything. Because the window was there and the carriages were visible, and she had learned over many years of transience that watching departures was a way of reminding yourself of something useful about the nature of things. Everything moves, and movement is not the same as loss. The morning after Mirha left, Caden Vale came off the 3rd floor at 7. This was unusual. She knew this the same way she knew everything about the building's rhythms, from consistent observation over time. The king did not appear in the servant access corridors during day hours. He used the main corridor on the 2nd floor, the formal staircase, the routes that were appropriate to his movement, and that kept the architecture of the fortress functioning in its intended way. Sira heard about it from Nell at breakfast. He went to the kitchen, Nell said, in the way she always delivered significant information, which was flatly and without dramatic emphasis, the vocal equivalent of setting something down in front of you and letting you pick it up yourself. The kitchen, Sira said, asked for a second tray for the 3rd floor, to be delivered along with the usual tray. Sira looked at her food. Why does that matter? Because the usual tray is a single service, 1 cup, 1 plate. Nell folded her hands. He asked for 2. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Someone on the other side of the room dropped a ladle, retrieved it, went back to work. Sira ate her breakfast. She was very aware that she was eating breakfast in a normal manner, and that a great deal was happening in a very thin space inside her chest that she was not going to let into her expression while she was sitting in a public room. She finished the meal, she cleaned her dishes. She went back to the east wing and sat on her bed and allowed herself precisely 10 minutes to think about what a second cup on a tray meant, and then she put it away with the same care she put everything away with, and she went to sleep for the day. That night she arrived at the third floor at midnight to find that the cleaning cart had been reorganized. Not dramatically, not in ways that changed its function. But the folded cloths had been moved from the lower shelf to the upper shelf, and the bracket log, a small leather notebook where she recorded delivery times, had a new page open to it with a date already written at the top in handwriting she recognized. She stood very still for a moment. Then she picked up the cart handles and began her shift. The south door was open tonight, all the way, the warm amber light of the room filling the doorway. She carried the tray in 2 cups, she noted 2 plates, the cloth already lifted slightly at one corner, and set it on the desk and stood. He was in the chair by the fire. Not the gray, she had become very practiced at reading the difference between his presence and his absence, the specific quality of a room that contained him in either state, and tonight he was fully present, his hands loose on the arms of the chair, his eyes open and tracking to her the moment she appeared in the doorframe. "The tray is from this morning," he said. "I heard. I should have told you in advance." He paused. "I didn't plan it." "You don't have to plan things in advance to tell me," she said. He looked at the fire. She moved the plain chair to its usual spot beside the hearth and sat down. There was a silence, but not the full silence of the early weeks. This was a silence that had texture and weight and knew what it was. "Murha's coordinator submitted 3 separate requests during the visit," he said. "I know Edna handled 2. The status review request is pending with the council assessor." He looked at her. "You didn't come to me." "No. Why?" She had thought about how to answer this if it came up. She had decided on the honest answer, because that was consistently the most efficient one with him. "Because if I can't hold this position on its own merits," she said, "then holding it because of something attached to you isn't holding it. It's being held." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, most people in your situation would have considered using every resource available. Most people in my situation haven't had 6 years to practice the difference between resources and liabilities." He looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze. The fire between them was at its evening level, not high, not low, the kind of steady burn that happens when someone tends it at regular intervals with care. "The status review will be resolved quickly," he said. "The assessor who handles council cases has clear criteria. Your wolf classification is unusual, not disqualifying. The review will confirm what the assignment already assumes." He paused. "Dren knows this." "The review was not intended to succeed." "Then what was it intended to do?" "Establish that you are subject to review." He turned back to the fire. "Which you are, of course, everyone is, but the act of submitting the review says something separate from the review itself. It says, this person can be questioned, their presence can be interrogated." "And what does it say about the person who submits the review?" He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but came from the same place. "That they're doing their job, and that they don't intend to stop." She thought about Dren, who she had never met, and about what Nell had described. A man who wanted things to proceed along expected lines. She thought about expected lines and what it cost to be the thing that bent them. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." She looked at the fire and said it simply without building up to it. What was it like before the gray started, when things were, she paused, not like they are now? The silence that followed this was different from the other silences. It had edges. "Different," he said finally. She waited. "I had a mate," he said, not the way someone says something painful. The way someone says something true that is also painful after the pain has been carried long enough that the truth and the pain are separate, and the truth can be spoken even when the pain cannot be resolved. Her name was Lysa. She was from the southern border territory. He stopped. "She was good at everything I was bad at." Which was, at the time, a longer list than it is now. Sira did not say anything. She kept her eyes on the fire and let him have the space to continue if he wanted to or stop if he needed to, because she understood that some things were said in the first layer, and some things required the layer underneath that, and you could not ask someone to go to the second layer before they were ready. She died 4 years ago, he said, in the winter. There was an illness in the southern border settlements that year, something that came up from the lowland territories, and she went to the border to manage the containment and she caught it. He paused. She had gone before I got there. The fire. I'm sorry, Sira said. I know, he looked at her. I don't say this often. But I mean it when I say that you're saying it matters. She held his gaze. Why? Because you say things that you mean, he said. I have been in rooms with people for 4 years who say things they've calculated. The calculations are often correct, but correct and true are different things, and I have spent 4 years in rooms full of correct and I have missed true. The lamp on the desk flickered once in a draft from somewhere, and then steadied. The gray started a month after she died, he said. It's a documented response in some high-alpha lines. When a fated bond is broken by death, the dominance core can fracture isn't the right word, it destabilizes. The dominance pressure that was distributed through the bond has nowhere to go, it builds. He paused. The gray is what happens when it builds past the management point. And you've been managing it alone, she said. Yes, for 4 years. Yes. She thought about the night in the corridor, the cracked wolf inside her pressing forward, the sound she had heard through the open door, the sound she had recognized because she had made it once herself at 16 and had decided never to make it again. It was Lysa, she said quietly. The sound I heard the night you were in the corridor, that's what it was. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. The fire continued its slow, steady burn, and the rain that had been absent for a week returned, soft and persistent, on the high windows above the hearth. After a while she reached forward and poured 2 cups from the pot on the tray and set one on the small table beside his chair and held the other in both hands, the warmth of it going through to her palms, and they sat there in the amber and the rain and said nothing, which was its own kind of conversation, the one that required the most to set up and the least effort to maintain. When she stood to leave, much later, she looked at the stone carving on the windowsill that she had been too far away to identify since the first night she had entered this room. She was close enough now. It was a wolf, small, simply carved, the lines of it worn by handling, not the aggressive posture of a formal alpha symbol, but a resting wolf, head down, eyes open. The kind of carving that fit inside a closed hand. She did not ask whose it had been. She thought she already knew. She went back to the corridor and finished her shift and walked down the stairs and through the kitchen, and down the east wing hallway to her small room, and she sat on the bed and looked at the strip of sky and thought about faded bonds and fractured things, and what it cost a person to carry the weight of a broken connection without anything to set it against. She thought about the second cup. She thought, I do not know what this is, but I know what it is not. It was not nothing, it had never been nothing. She had known that since the first night on the rainy stairs, and she had been careful with it, because careful was how she had learned to handle everything that could break. She was still being careful. But careful, she was beginning to understand, did not mean held at arm's length. Careful could mean held with both hands securely, with the specific attention of someone who understood the value of what they were carrying. She went to sleep with the rain on the window. She slept and she did not dream of roads. The status review appointment came through the council assessor's office on a Tuesday. Sira was to appear at the administrative building on the east side of the fortress grounds the following morning at 10. She went. She had been through assessment processes before, once at 17, when she'd applied for a transit permit through Pact territory and needed her Omega classification confirmed for the paperwork, and once at 20 when she'd tried to secure a long-term work contract with a mid-size Pact settlement and been told, kindly but definitively, that unclaimed Omegas without full wolf manifestation didn't qualify for their standard employment terms. The assessor this time was a woman named Claire, middle-aged, with the brisk competence of someone who did a great deal of technical evaluation and had very little patience for either drama or deflection. She had a small instrument that read the wolf spirit, a glass cylinder on a stand, calibrated, that registered the presence and quality of the energy. Sira had seen versions of it before. Claire held the cylinder near Sira's hand. The cylinder glowed, a middle-level steady gold, not bright, not dim, unusual but not absent, not nothing. Claire wrote something in her record. She did not show Sira the notation, but Sira had watched enough assessors write enough notations to read the body language of the hand. What Claire was writing was not short, and it was not dismissive. Your manifestation is partial, Claire said, in the careful neutral tone of a professional being accurate, but the quality is stable and it is not trending downward. Some incomplete manifestations continue to develop outside of typical timelines. She paused. The assessment will note that your current status is atypical, non-standard, but not disqualifying for service roles. Including the current assignment, Sira said. Including service roles in proximity to high-alpha residences, Claire said precisely. The assignment parameters are within scope. She wrote the conclusion on a separate sheet and sealed it with the assessor's stamp. The council will receive a copy, she said. Domestic management will receive a copy, you keep the original. She handed Sira the sealed document. Sira walked back to the East Wing with the sealed letter in her hand and thought about all the processes she had gone through in 6 years to establish and re-establish the simple fact of her right to be in a given place. Assessment after assessment, each one measuring the incomplete thing inside her against a standard that she had never quite met and never quite missed, arriving each time in the narrow space between qualified and disqualified, permitted but with caveats, accepted but provisionally. This time the letter said, within scope. She sat on her bed and held the sealed document and allowed herself, carefully and briefly, to feel the weight of it. Not triumph, something quieter. The specific relief of a thing that has been challenged returning, with documentation, to where it was. Then she put the letter in the small lockbox under her bed where she kept her coin and her other important papers, and she went to sleep, and she woke up at 11 in the evening and dressed and went to her shift. The south door was wide open. The 2-cup tray was on the desk. Cadden was at the map on the wall, his back to the door, a marker in his hand. The review came back, she said, from the doorway. He turned. I know, Claire's office sent a copy to the household file. He looked at her. Within scope. Yes, sir. He turned back to the map. Dren received his copy as well. She set the tray down and stood beside the desk and looked at the map from this new angle. The yellow eastern border had more markers on it than the last time she had looked. 3 new question mark symbols. A new line in red, dotted, running parallel to an existing green line. The Eastern Challenge, she said, it's escalating. The Alpha of the vast territory has been making contact with the border settlements, he said. Not formally, informally. He's building relationships the way you do before you make a formal move. You put people in place who owe you something, and then when you're ready, the move comes from inside rather than outside. She looked at the red dotted line. How long does he have before the informal becomes formal? 3 months, perhaps 4. He put the marker down. He's waiting for something. What? He was quiet for a moment. She knew this quality of quiet by now. It was not the evasive quiet or the grief quiet, but the thinking quiet. The pause that happened when he was deciding something about whether to say the thing directly or to step around it. He decided on direct. She had noticed this happened more often now than it had 3 weeks ago. He's waiting for evidence of weakness, Cadden said. The kind of challenge he's planning requires a specific kind of justification within pack law. You cannot formally challenge a territory sovereign without grounds. Tradition requires demonstrable instability in the challenged party's leadership. She looked at him, and he thinks he has grounds. He thinks he has grounds, Cadden said, or he thinks he can create them. The intelligence I've been receiving suggests he has been monitoring the fortress, monitoring internal reports, communication between pack leaders and their council representatives. He paused. He knows about the gray. The room was quiet for a moment. He's been waiting 4 years, Sarah said. Not 4 years. He didn't know about it for the first 2. He has likely been building his case for 2 years. What's the case? That an alpha king who has been managing a physiological instability for 2 years without disclosure to the full council is not in full command of his capacity to lead, and that the decree, which he has characterized in his communications as an irrational and sentimental act, is evidence of the instability rather than separate from it. Sira stood very still. He's using the decree as evidence, she said. Yes, sir. She looked at the map, the red dotted line, the question marks. You knew this was a possibility when you issued it, she said. He looked at her directly. Yes. She thought about all the ways this situation could have been arranged differently. He could have had her reassigned the morning after the gray. He could have said nothing, documented nothing, left the night as an unreported incident in an unreported chain of unreported incidents. He could have managed it, the way he managed everything, alone and quietly, without giving anyone in the Eastern Territories anything to point at. He had not done that. He had posted a decree on the corridor in front of 3 witnesses. "You knew," she said again, not with accusation, but with the effort of understanding something from the outside that had a different logic on the inside. "You knew it could be used against you, and you did it anyway." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He held her gaze. He did not answer immediately. He let the pause sit between them, not as evasion, but as the space that the honest answer needed around it in order to be said correctly. "Because," he said, "some things need to be said out loud." She held that for a moment. The fire, the rain, the map on the wall with its question marks and failing lines. She thought about 4 years of managing alone, about what it cost to say something out loud after 4 years of silence, about what it meant to say it in the specific form of a decree, which was the only language available to someone for whom ordinary language had been replaced by protocol and management and the weight of 5 packs. She thought, he told 3 guards at dawn, with the specific bluntness of someone who had carried something past its management point. She thought that was the only way he knew how. "All right," she said. She sat down in the plain chair. She poured 2 cups. She handed him one and kept the other. They drank tea in the amber lamplight while the eastern border waited on the wall and the rain came down, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. Maid. Wren found her on a Wednesday afternoon. She was in the east courtyard, which she sometimes used during the midday hours when sleep did not come immediately. There was a stone bench along the inner wall where the afternoon light collected warmly and the wind was blocked, and she sat there with her back to the stone and her eyes half closed, neither fully resting nor fully thinking, occupying the particular intermediate state of someone who had become practiced at making use of every kind of quiet. She heard him before she saw him, boots on courtyard stone, heavier than a servant's, slower than a guard's rounds, deliberate. She opened her eyes. Wren was the king's first beta. She had seen him in the corridor once, heard his name from Nell, and formed her opinion of him from the distance. A man of 40, heavy-built, with a face that had organized itself over a long life into an expression of cautious assessment. Not unkind, not warm, the face of someone who had been trusted with important things and had not let any of them fall. He sat on the other end of the bench without asking. She noted this, the lack of preamble, the direct claim of physical space, and read it as a person who had decided to treat her as an equal for purposes of this conversation, and was demonstrating it through posture rather than words. "You know who I am," he said, not a question. "Wren," she said. "First beta. You know what that means for our current conversation. You speak for the king when he's not present and sometimes when he is." She paused. "But you're here without announcement, in a servant's courtyard on a bench, so I don't think this is an official communication." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has been told accurate things and is deciding how to respond to them. Then he said, "No, it's not official." She waited. "What do you know about the gray?" he said. "What he's told me," she said. "What I've observed, the physiological description, the frequency." "The cause?" Yes, she kept her voice even, "the cause." Wren was quiet for a moment. He looked at the courtyard, the stones, the low wall at the far end, the single tree that grew in the northeast corner with the particular stubborn vitality of something that had not been expected to survive and had survived anyway. "He hasn't told you everything," he said. "Not because he's hiding it, because there are parts of it he doesn't discuss with anyone. There are parts I know that I have not been given permission to share." "Then why are you here?" she said. "Because the situation is changing," he said. "The Voss challenge is not 3 months away, it's closer to 1. He looked at her directly. "Our intelligence was wrong. Voss moved faster than expected. He has already submitted a formal notice of inquiry to the Interpack Council, not a direct challenge yet, but the step before one. The council review is in 14 days. She held this information. 14 days was not 3 months. It was not even the 6 weeks remaining on her trial contract. "What does a council review entail?" she said. "Voss presents his evidence of instability. The Interpack Council, 7 members, 1 from each pack plus 2 independents, reviews it. If they find sufficient grounds, they can issue a formal recommendation of leadership review. That's not the same as removing Cadden from his position, but it's the first step on that road. Ren paused. In practice, a formal recommendation creates an opening. It signals that the leadership is contestable. Other alphas pay attention to signals. What's the evidence Voss is presenting? Ren looked at the tree. The gray, 2 years of intelligence about frequency and severity. Written reports from someone inside the fortress who has been feeding information to the Voss territory for a period the King's Security Office is still working to determine. Sira went very still. Someone inside, she said. Yes, someone who knows about the gray in detail. Yes, he paused. We have a short list we have not confirmed. She thought about the people who would have access to that kind of detailed information. Guards who had seen the aftermath, domestic staff who had been on the 3rd floor. Orin, whose blankness she had always read as protective. People she had eaten dinner with for weeks without knowing what they were carrying. And the decree, she said. Voss is using the decree. He's using it as exhibit evidence of erratic decision-making. His argument is that an Alpha King issuing a capital punishment decree about a maid's sleep schedule is not in stable command. She looked at the courtyard stones. Does Cadden know the timeline has moved? He knows this morning. The formal notice arrived at the council office at 7. He was informed by 8. Ren paused. He asked me to do 3 things. 2 of them I've already done. The 3rd was to speak with you. She looked at him. Why me specifically? Because he does not want you to find out about the timeline from a secondary source and have the wrong impression of where you stand. Ren held her gaze. His words. She thought about what it took to send someone to say that, to think about where another person would be getting their information from and what impression they might form, and to decide that the impression mattered enough to address before it formed incorrectly. What does he want me to know? She said. That the situation is not your responsibility to manage, Ren said. That the decree was his decision, made for his own reasons, and that whatever consequences it carries are his to handle. And that your position in this household is not contingent on the outcome of the council review. My trial contract expires in 6 weeks anyway, she said. He has instructed the domestic office, Ren said carefully, to prepare a permanent contract for your review. She looked at him. He didn't tell you, Ren said. No, she thought about the 2nd cup on the tray, the 2 chairs by the fire, the way the bracket log had a date already written on its new page in handwriting she recognized. He doesn't tell me everything, she said. He doesn't tell anyone everything, Ren said. He told you more than most. She sat on the bench and held the layers of this conversation and took it apart the way she took apart everything that had multiple moving pieces. The Voss challenge. The 14 days, the permanent contract, the 2nd cup. She said, what aren't you telling me? Ren looked at the courtyard tree. The parts I don't have permission to share, he said. Is it about the gray, she said. About what it actually does, what it's actually doing to him. He was quiet for a long moment. Ren, she said, because she had decided in the past 20 seconds that quiet and careful were not going to serve her as well in this conversation as they served her in most others. I am not asking as a gossip. I am not going to use whatever you tell me incorrectly. I need to understand what is actually happening so that I can make accurate decisions about what I do next. He looked at her. He spent a moment deciding something. She could see the decision moving through his expression, the way it moves through the expressions of people who have a habit of keeping things, and are evaluating, very specifically, whether a given thing should be kept or shared. He shared it. The gray is not manageable indefinitely, he said. It has a progression. In the early years it can be contained, managed, as he says, through effort and will and whatever system a given individual builds around it. But over time, without a stabilizing bond, it deepens. He paused. 4 years is a long time. The frequency has increased. The severity has increased. What happens if the progression is not interrupted is, he stopped. Not immediate, but directional. She held this word, directional, moving in a direction. Is he aware, she said. He has always been aware. She thought about a man who had built a system around something that was progressively getting worse, and who had managed it with the precision of someone who understood the mechanics of what was happening to him, and had decided, for whatever reasons, to manage it rather than ask for help. She thought about the night in the corridor, the sound through the open door, the specific quality of someone working with everything they had at holding something together. She thought about the word management and about what Mirha had said in the stairwell. He uses the word managing the way other people say caring for. The gray episodes, she said. He said my presence that it stopped the episode. On the night in the corridor. Yes, Ren said. Why? He looked at her directly. Because of what you are. An incomplete omega, she said. A broken wolf. A wolf that is still becoming, Ren said. Not finished, not fixed, still in the process of what it's turning into. He paused. There is a documented phenomenon in older wolf lore, very old pre-pack organization from the period when wolf bonds were understood differently. It was called resonance. An omega whose wolf spirit is in a state of active development, not complete, not settled, can, under certain circumstances, resonate with an alpha whose core has been fractured. The open frequency of the incomplete wolf meets the fractured frequency of the alpha. It doesn't heal the fracture, but it interrupts the collapse. Sarah looked at the courtyard tree. That's why he sent me to you, she said. Partly, Ren said. The other reason is what I said at the beginning. He didn't want you to have the wrong impression. She thought about a man who had all the power in 5 packs and who had sent his first beta to sit with her on a bench and make sure she understood that the situation was not her responsibility. She thought about what it meant that the same man had posted a decree at dawn like someone who had been silent for 4 years and had finally found a single sentence worth saying out loud. What does he need from me, she said. Not what I can give, what does he actually need? Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the same thing everyone needs, and no one who has managed alone for 4 years knows how to ask for. She looked at him. Someone who stays, Ren said simply. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about roads. She thought about the narrow bed in the east wing and the strip of sky in the window and the first night she had lay down thinking about where she would go next. She thought about the wolf inside her, cracked and quiet and persistent, pressing forward toward the south end of the 3rd floor corridor every night without waiting to be asked. All right, she said. She stood up from the bench. She went back inside. She went to her room and lay down and did not sleep, but she lay still and thought about 14 days and what happened inside them and what she was going to do. She thought for a long time. When she arrived at the 3rd floor at midnight, the south door was open. She walked past the tray on the bracket and went directly to the door and pushed it open fully and stood in the doorframe. He was at the desk with his back to her, the same as the night he had shown her the map and said everything is always changing. The lamp was lit. The papers were spread. She said, Ren told me. He turned. She looked at him across the room and thought about resonance, and about fractured things, and about what it meant to be a wolf that was still becoming. She thought about the fact that she had spent 6 years practicing smallness, and had arrived at a fortress that turned out to be the right shape for what she actually was. All right, he said. All right, she said back. She came in, she sat down. She poured 2 cups and they worked in the same room in the same silence that had always been theirs, and the lamp burned steadily, and the eastern border waited on the wall, and 14 days began to count down without asking either of them if they were ready. The days that followed had a different quality from the weeks before them, not worse exactly but denser. Compressed, the way air compresses before a storm, everything still in its usual place, but carrying more weight per inch than it had previously. Sarah continued her shifts. The tray went in every night. She sat in the plain chair while Cadden worked the desk or studied the map or, increasingly, conducted short, focused conversations with Ren in the corridor outside that she pretended not to hear and that he knew she heard. The conversations were about the VOS preparation, the council review structure, the specific arguments that would be presented and the specific arguments that would need to be countered. She listened not because she was eavesdropping, but because she was making herself familiar with the territory of what was coming. The way you make yourself familiar with any territory you're going to have to navigate. On the 4th day before the review, she said something at the desk that changed the shape of the conversation. She had not planned it. It came out of something Cadden said about the council's requirement for documented evidence of stability, proof, provided in formal written record, that the alpha's capacity for decision-making met a defined standard. Cadden was describing the documentation they intended to submit, the operational records, the border management decisions, the administrative outcomes of the past 4 years. She said they're not going to accept operational records as evidence of personal stability. He stopped, he looked at her. The challenge isn't about the quality of your decisions, she said. Voss knows the decisions have been good. He's not arguing incompetence. He's arguing instability. Those are different categories. A person can be making excellent decisions while also being in decline. The council knows this. The documentation you're describing addresses the wrong category. He was quiet for a moment. What addresses the right one? She thought about it. Testimony, she said. Not from people who benefit from your stability, from people who have observed you directly in unguarded moments over time and can speak to what they saw. He looked at her, she looked back at him. Who would do that, he said. She thought about Oren, who had walked that corridor for 4 years and maintained his blankness as a form of loyalty. She thought about Claire, the assessor, who had been precise and undramatic about what she documented. She thought about Edna, who had said I'm not doing anything when she had rearranged the bracket log. The people who have been here, she said. The people who chose to stay in proximity to something they weren't required to stay near. He was very still for a moment, then he said, I have never asked anyone to testify on my behalf. I know, she said, you've been managing. He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand as the one that meant he was seeing something accurately, and did not entirely want to, but was going to see it anyway. I could make the request, she said. That's not your responsibility. I know it's not, she said. I'm offering anyway, she paused. That's what offering is, a thing given outside of obligation. He held her gaze for a long time. All right, he said finally. She went to Oren the next morning and asked him directly, which was the only approach Oren responded to. He listened to what she said, looked at the wall and then said, I have 14 years of observation documented in my personal guard log. I do not believe those records have ever been formally submitted to council. He looked at her. I believe it might be time to submit them. She went to Edna and Edna said, before Sira had finished explaining, I have been maintaining an operational journal since the king's mate died. It contains observations relevant to his functional capacity that I have never been asked for and have therefore never shared. She picked up her pen. Send the council's submission addressed to me by morning, and I will ensure the journal is there by noon. She went to Claire, who received her in the small assessment office and listened carefully and then said, the assessment record I filed is a public document. Its contents, including the specific notation about stable presence and functional resonance, can be submitted by any party to any relevant council process. Sira went back to the East Wing. She sat on her bed. She had 3 sets of documentation that nobody had asked for, that had existed for years in the hands of people who had simply continued to observe and record because that was what careful people did with things that mattered. She thought the network of people who had been paying attention was larger than she had known. It had been paying attention quietly, the way she paid attention without performing it. She brought all 3 documents to Ren that afternoon. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. He doesn't know you did this, Ren said. Not yet, she said. He looked at her. He's going to have something to say about it. I know. He values, Ren paused. He values managing things himself. I know, she said again, and I'm not managing anything. I asked 3 people if they had something they wanted to share. They did. I carried it from one place to another. She met Ren's gaze. That's what I do. He held the documents. He looked at them again, the solid fact of them, the years of careful observation made visible in ink. Thank you, he said. She went back to her room. She waited for evening with the particular quality of patience she had developed in the years of roads and postings and provisional places, the patience that was not passive but active, a deliberate and practiced engagement with the present moment while the next one organized itself. At midnight she went upstairs. The south door was closed. She left the tray at the bracket and began the mop. Halfway through the corridor the door opened. Cadden stood in the frame. He looked at her in the lamplight with an expression she had not seen before, not the managing expression, not the grief expression, not the level and measuring look she had catalogued in the first weeks, something more open than any of those. Something that looked like what a person's face does when they have been carrying something alone, and have just found out, without expecting it, that they were not actually alone. "Ren told me," he said. She kept her hands on the mop. "I know. You didn't ask me first." "No," she said, "I didn't." He looked at her for a long moment. Why? She thought about the right answer to this. She thought about all the things she could say about the council timeline, about the evidence category, about operational strategy. All of these were true. None of them were the real answer. The real answer was, because you have been managing alone for 4 years and you are very bad at accepting help, and if I had asked you first, you would have said you had it handled. She said, because some things don't need permission, they just need doing. He was quiet for a long moment. "Come in," he said. She left the mop. She came in. She sat in the plain chair and he sat in the chair by the fire, and they were in the same room together in the same quiet that had always been theirs. And outside the window the night was cold and clear, with more stars than the rain had been letting through, and the eastern border waited on the wall. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she agreed. Neither of them said, "And then what?" The question was there in the room with them. They let it be there, the way they let things be when naming them early would do more damage than waiting. She thought about offering to stay longer that night. She thought about the gray and the deepening progression and the 14 days, now 3, and what Ren had said about someone who stays. She did not offer. She let the night be what it was, which was enough. She went back to her mop at 2 in the morning, and she finished the corridor with the lamp light on the stone and the stars visible through the high windows, and she thought, 3 days. She could do 3 days. She had done longer things on worse days, with no one in any room waiting for her to come back. This was different. She held the difference carefully in both hands. She went downstairs. Maid. On the morning of the second day before the council review, Cadden came to her. Not through Ren. Not through Edna or a note in the basket or any of the indirect channels that people used to reach each other inside a large building that had been organized, over decades, around the principle that certain people did not appear in certain corridors without an announcement first. He came himself to the East Wing. At 9 in the morning, which was the specific hour she was usually awake but not yet at full alertness, sitting on her bed with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had carried up from the kitchen. She heard the footsteps in the hall and recognized them before she registered what was strange about hearing them here. By the time she registered the strangeness, the knock was already on her door. She opened it. He was in the same plain gray shirt she had seen him in a dozen times, no coat, no formal addition to his appearance that would have suggested this was a planned visit. He looked slightly as if he had been walking and had ended up here without entirely planning to, which was, she suspected, exactly what had happened. She stepped back from the door. He came in. The room was very small with him in it. Not uncomfortably, it was simply very apparent that it was a small room, her room, with one narrow window and one narrow bed, and the lockbox under the bed and the single hook on the wall where her uniform hung. He stood in the center of it and looked at nothing in particular, which she recognized as the look of someone who has arrived somewhere with a purpose, and is now discovering that the purpose requires more words than they initially budgeted. She sat down on the bed, she held her tea, she waited. "The council review," he said, "will go as it goes. The documentation from Oren and Edna and the assessor is strong. The operational record is strong. Ren is prepared." He paused. "Whether it's enough, that's a question that doesn't resolve before the review happens." "I know," she said. "What I want you to understand is that regardless of the outcome, my decision about your contract is separate." He looked at her directly. "The permanent contract is not contingent on the review. It was decided before the review was scheduled. It will not be rescinded based on outcomes." She looked at her tea. She thought about the right response to this, and she thought about what she had said to Mirha in the stairwell, "I won't be someone's medicine." And she thought about how that had been the right thing to say at that moment, and might be a more complicated thing to apply now, in this room, to a man who was standing in her small East Wing room at 9 in the morning, having clearly walked here, because he needed to say something in person. She looked up at him. "What does the contract say?" she said. He blinked. She had surprised him. "What?" "The permanent contract. What does it say? What position, what duties, what terms?" He stood very still for a moment. Then slowly, with the slight quality of someone who had prepared for one conversation and found themselves in a different one. Household service, third floor assignment indefinite, pay scale equivalent to senior domestic staff, rights to reside in the East Wing, access to Fortress grounds, annual review of terms. He paused. It uses the standard language for permanent domestic staff. Standard household staff language, she said. Yes, sir. She looked at him. Why isn't it standard language for a different kind of position? He was quiet. She held his gaze. Because, he said carefully, the kind of position I would want to offer you is not one that exists in the household registry. And because offering something that has no formal name to someone who has spent 6 years fighting for formal recognition seemed, he stopped. Wrong, she said. Insufficient, he said. Not wrong, insufficient. She sat on the bed with her tea and thought about everything she had been careful about, everything she had held at arm's length for the 6 weeks she had been here, all the small, precise decisions she had made about not building on insufficient foundations. She thought about the stone carving on the windowsill. She thought about a second cup on a tray before anyone had asked for it. She thought about a decree at dawn. She set her tea down. I told Murha, she said, that I wouldn't be someone's medicine. I remember, he said. Ren mentioned it. I meant it. I know. I'm not taking a position because I'm useful to you. I won't stay because it's better for your management of the Grey. If that's the reason, then it's the wrong reason and we both know it, and pretending otherwise would cost us something we can't recover. She looked at him directly. Is that the reason? He held her gaze. No, he said. What is the reason? He stood in her small room with the morning light coming through the narrow window and he said, because you are the only person I have been in a room with in 4 years who has made me feel that the room itself is large enough. Not the management, not the system, not what I can give you formally, just, he stopped, the room. She held that sentence. She had built very careful walls around her understanding of what this was, and what she would let herself want, and what was a reasonable thing to expect versus an insufficient foundation. She had been disciplined and clear-eyed, and she had not invested in beliefs before she had confirmed them. She was looking at a confirmation. She said, I'm not going to take the domestic contract. He went very still. I don't want a domestic contract, she said. Not because I want something higher, because I don't want a category. I've spent 6 years being assigned to categories and evaluated within them, and I'm very tired of being the kind of thing that fits into a box, even a good box. She looked at him. What I want is what we already have, the room, the fire, the 2 cups. I want that to be the actual thing, not a cover story for a position title. He looked at her for a long moment. If the review goes badly, he said, the situation here becomes unstable. I don't know what the shape of it looks like. I don't know what I can. I know, she said. I'm not asking for certainty. I've never had certainty. I'm specifically not built for certainty. She held his gaze. What I'm asking for is honest. He said, yes. Just that word, the one word that was the whole answer. She nodded, she picked up her tea, she looked at the window. The review is in 2 days, she said. Yes. Then go do what you need to do, she said, and come back. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted in the way things shift when a person has been braced for a difficult conversation and discovered that the actual conversation was something else. Something that required a different posture and a different set of muscles, the ones you used not for holding firm, but for breathing normally. He said, all right. He went to the door, he stopped with his hand on the frame. Sira. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, for the documents, for the people you spoke to, for he paused, for knowing which things needed doing without waiting to be asked. She held her tea. That's what I do, she said. He went. She sat on her bed for a long time after the footsteps faded from the East Wing corridor. She sat with the specific and precise feeling that arrives when something you have been circling for weeks resolves itself into a shape you can hold directly. She thought about the Holton pack and the road at 16. She thought about 6 years of postings and the careful discipline of not investing before confirmation. She thought about every choice she had made to stay small and movable and low cost. She thought about walking into a fortress because the job was unfillable, and something about unfillable jobs had always called to her, the shape of them, the way they needed someone specific enough that the usual candidates didn't fit. She thought, I am very specific. I have always been very specific. She thought, it is possible that this is the shape I was being specific for, and that it has taken 6 years to reach it, and that the 6 years were not wasted time but qualifying time, the way certain things can only be understood after you have carried them long enough. She drank her tea. She was not afraid. She had been afraid enough for long enough in enough places that did not hold her correctly. She was not going to use that feeling here in this place, where the walls were made of the right stone. She spent the day quietly. She ate dinner in the hall, and Nell did not come to sit with her, but caught her eye once from the window table, with an expression that said she understood things without needing to be told them, which was the characteristic quality of someone who had spent years paying attention. She went to her shift at midnight. The south door was closed. She left the tray. She mopped the corridor with the focused care she gave to everything she did well. At 2 in the morning she heard the south door open. She was at the north end of the corridor near the stairs. She did not turn around. She heard footsteps not toward her, not the measured sound of a person crossing the room, but the quieter sound of someone leaning against an open door frame and staying there. She kept mopping. Go to sleep, she said without turning around. A pause. You're still working, he said. I'll be done in 10 minutes, go back in. Another pause, longer. She could feel the weight of his presence at the south end of the corridor the way she had learned to feel the presence of the gray, not through any sense that had a name, but through the specific quality of the air when he was in it. Sarah, he said. She turned around. He was in the doorframe exactly as she had imagined, his shoulder against the wood, the amber light of the room behind him. She looked at him. 10 minutes, she said. He went back in. She finished the corridor. She returned the cart to its place at the top of the stairs and walked down the corridor to the open door and went in. She sat in the plain chair. He sat in the chair by the fire. The 2 cups were already poured. She did not ask when he had made the tea. He did not tell her. She thought 2 days. She picked up her cup. Outside, the clear night held its stars, and the eastern border was still marked with question marks, and somewhere in a territory called Voss, a man was preparing his arguments, and none of that was hers to solve or manage or carry. What was hers was this room, and this fire, and the 2 cups, and the even breathing of a man who was in a room with someone who was not going anywhere. She thought, I know what this is. She held it with both hands. The night before the review, Wren found her in the east courtyard again. It was evening this time, not afternoon, the cold pressing itself into the stones with the particular authority of the month turning its corner toward winter. She had her hands tucked under her arms and was watching the northeast corner of the sky where the first of the winter stars had arrived early this year, according to Edna, who kept track of such things. Wren sat on the bench the same way he always did, without ceremony, with the direct claim of someone who had decided the bench was a place for this kind of conversation and was not going to waste time establishing that premise. Tomorrow, he said. I know. You've seen the documents, you know what the council will hear. He paused. What you haven't seen is the part of the preparation that concerns you directly. She looked at him. Voss is going to mention the decree. Voss is going to present the decree as central evidence. He has documented testimony from 3 people inside the fortress. We have identified all 3 now, describing not just the decree itself but the context surrounding it. The night in the corridor, your access to the chamber, the tray arrangements. She thought about who had been positioned to observe all of those things over a period of months. She thought about small omissions, about bracket logs that didn't distinguish between delivery types, about Oren's studied blankness. Someone who watches details, she said. A member of the kitchen staff, Wren said. She has been here 8 years. She will not be here by morning. Sira did not ask what that meant, practically, for the woman in question. She filed it away as information that was not her responsibility to resolve. Voss's argument, she said, is that the decree represents a specific type of instability, emotional attachment influencing formal decision-making in a context where clarity and detachment are required. He will argue that an alpha who would issue a capital threat over a domestic worker's comfort is an alpha whose judgment has been compromised by a bond that should not exist. A bond, she said. That will be his word, Wren said carefully. He will be implying a fated bond, he will not be able to prove one. But implication in council chambers functions differently than proof. It plants a question. The council then has to determine whether the question undermines confidence. She sat with this. Someone was going to stand up tomorrow and say in a formal council setting that the Alpha King had formed an inappropriate bond with an Omega Maid and that this bond was evidence of incapacity. The council would listen. The council would have questions. What is Cadden's counter, she said. That the decree was a command decision made on behalf of a member of his household during a period of vulnerability. That it falls within the protective authority of the household sovereign and does not require further justification. That the subsequent behavior, the contract extension, the adjusted duties, represents rational integration of a useful domestic staff member into permanent household service. She heard every word of this clearly. She heard what it was, accurate, defensible, useful in a formal setting. She also heard what it was not. He's going to minimize it, she said. He's going to frame it in terms the council can process without being alarmed, Ren said. Which means making it smaller than it is. Ren looked at her, yes. She looked at the northeast star. She thought about what she had said to him this morning in her room. I want the actual thing, not a cover story for a position title. She thought about what he had said back to her, yes. Does he know I know the strategy, she said. He knows I was going to speak with you. Does he know what I'm going to say about it? Ren was quiet for a moment. He knows you well enough, he said, to be anticipating this specific concern. She stood up from the bench. I'm going upstairs, she said. Ren did not say anything. He let her go. The third floor was empty at this hour. Her shift did not start until midnight, and it was 9 in the evening, and the corridor was quiet with the lamp light that burned continuously, a permanent warmth in the stone. She knocked on the south door, which she had never done before because the south door had always been open or closed on its own terms, and she had always responded accordingly. There was a pause, and then the door opened. He looked at her. He did not look surprised. Ren was right. He had been expecting this. Come in, he said. She came in. She stood in the center of the room with the fire behind her and the desk to her left, and the map on the wall and the stone wolf on the windowsill, and she said, without building up to it, "Don't make it small." He was still. At the review tomorrow, she said, when Voss raises the decree and they ask about it, don't make it small. Don't call it a command decision about a household member. Don't make me a domestic adjustment. She held his gaze. Say what it was. He looked at her for a long moment. If I say what it was, he said, it gives Voss exactly what he needs. It confirms the bond argument. It gives the council grounds to question my judgment on the basis of personal attachment. I know, she said. It could compromise the entire case. I know. You understand what I'm saying, the practical outcome of. I understand the practical outcome, she said. I'm asking you to do it anyway. He was quiet. She said, you've been managing things correctly for 4 years. You've been building the right case in the right way and making the right arguments and submitting the right documentation. And somewhere in the last few months, you issued a decree about a person's sleep before you were awake enough to make a managed decision about it. She paused. That decree, she said, is the truest thing you have done in 4 years. And I am not willing to let you stand in a council chamber and call it smaller than it is. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back at him. All right, he said, all right. She went back downstairs. She ate a late meal in the empty kitchen where the bread smell was fading but still present, a warmth in the residual air. She sat by the cooling oven and ate and thought about tomorrow. She was not afraid. She was very precisely not afraid, in the specific way that people are not afraid when they have stopped performing fearlessness and arrived at the actual state. She finished her meal. She went to her shift at midnight. She mopped the corridor in the lamp light with the thoroughness she gave to everything that she did well. And she thought with great simplicity and clarity, whatever tomorrow is, I will be in it, and that is enough. The day of the review arrived the way significant days always arrive, with complete indifference to the fact that they are significant. The morning was cold and clear, and the kitchen started bread at 4, and the corridor guard changed at 6, and Edna unlocked her office at 7, and everything in the fortress proceeded on its ordinary schedule, while somewhere in the administrative building on the East Grounds, the Interpack Council was assembling to hear the case of an Alpha King's fitness to lead. Sira slept until 9. She woke with the particular clarity that sometimes came after nights of intense thought, as if the mind had sorted everything while the body rested and presented the organized result upon waking. She lay on the narrow bed and looked at the strip of sky gray today, the thick pale gray of a sky holding itself before winter, and she thought, today happens. She dressed, she went to breakfast. She ate with the focused attention of someone providing their body with fuel, not the distracted eating of someone too absorbed in the coming event to remember that the body needed managing regardless. Nell was at the window table, their eyes met. Nell gave her the 2mm nod that was Nell's version of everything she was not saying out loud. Sira gave it back. She went to the east courtyard after breakfast and sat on the bench and watched the sky. The review was closed to non-council observers. She had known this. She had not asked to attend. She had understood from the moment Wren had explained the structure that her role in the day's events was the same role she played in the corridor, present, functional outside the door. Wren had told her the review would begin at 9 and was expected to last 3 to 5 hours depending on the presentation. She had not asked for updates. She had not arranged any system of receiving information while it was ongoing. She had decided that she would sit in the present moment and let the day move through its hours and trust that what was happening in the council chamber was sufficient for what the situation required. She was good at this, she had practiced it. At 10:30 something changed. She felt it before she heard it, a shift in the quality of the building's atmosphere, the specific change that happened when a large organized system suddenly redirected its attention. The servants' movements in the visible parts of the courtyard shifted subtly. 3 guards who had been at their posts on the outer wall converged briefly toward the east, said something too quiet to hear, and dispersed. A courier she had never seen before went through the inner gate at speed. She stood up from the bench. A second courier arrived within 2 minutes, going the same direction. She walked to the inner corridor and found Wren there, coming toward her at the particular pace that was not running. He was too controlled for running, but was unmistakably urgent. Alpha of the vast territory, Wren said without stopping, gesturing for her to follow him, has submitted to the council as supplementary evidence documentation of the gray that includes a specific claim, not just the existence of the condition, a progression timeline. He was moving fast, she matched his pace. He is claiming that based on the intelligence he has gathered, the progression has reached a point where the next severe episode will be, he paused for a fraction of a second, unmanageable. Not managed alone. Not managed at all. He's claiming it's terminal, she said. Not terminal, that it will produce an incapacitation event, prolonged, potentially indefinite. He turned a corner. The council asked Cadden to respond to this claim directly, he said. He said it was accurate, she said. Wren stopped walking. He turned and looked at her. He said it was accurate, she said again. He told them the truth. A pause. Wren looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, the careful assessment that was his default giving way briefly to something more direct. Yes, he said. He told them the truth. He said that the Gray's progression over 4 years has reached a point where the next severe episode would likely be beyond the threshold his current management system can contain. He said this clearly and without qualification, in front of all 7 council members and both independent representatives. She stood in the corridor and thought about a man who had been managing alone for 4 years, in a system he had built and maintained with enormous discipline, standing in front of a council that was assembled to question his fitness, and telling them the exact thing that made the questioning easiest. She thought he said what was true. He had done the thing she had asked him to do, and then he had taken it further. The council, she said, how did they respond? They are in closed deliberation. That's what the couriers are, requests for supplementary documentation that Cadden's office is preparing. Wren started moving again. She followed. The Voss Alpha is arguing that the admission confirms his case, that an Alpha who acknowledges incapacitation risk cannot lead. And Cadden's counter. That leadership requires accurate self-knowledge and the willingness to disclose it, that managing a condition in secret for 4 years and continuing to produce the administrative outcomes documented in the operational record is evidence of capacity, not its absence. A pause, and that the condition is being addressed. Being addressed, she said, "How?" Ren looked at her, not blankly, directly. "He told them about the resonance," he said. She stopped walking. "He told them that there is a documented physiological phenomenon by which an Omega's developing wolf spirit can interrupt and partially stabilize the Grey's progression. He told them that there is a person in his household whose presence has already demonstrated this function on at least one documented occasion. He told them." Ren paused. "He told them her name." She stood in the corridor. He had said her name. In a formal council chamber, in response to a challenge to his fitness to lead, he had said her name and described what she was and what had happened and what it meant. He had not called it a household adjustment or a domestic arrangement or anything smaller than what it was. She thought he did it. Ren was watching her. "What happens now?" she said. "The council deliberates," he said. "They have all the evidence. The operational record, the guard testimony, the assessor's documentation, the admission about the progression, the explanation of the resonance. They now vote on whether the evidence supports a formal leadership review recommendation or whether it constitutes sufficient evidence of capacity for the challenge to be dismissed. Voss. He can argue during the deliberation period. He has 3 more hours." Ren paused. His case is no longer about an irrational decree. His case is now about whether a bond with an Omega who has not completed her wolf manifestation is a stable enough intervention to justify continued leadership. She thought about Claire's notation, stable and non-declining. She thought about the resonance documentation in the older lore that Ren had described. She thought about 6 weeks of the Grey not happening, of 2 cups on a tray, of a fire that burned at the same steady level every night because someone was tending it. "That's actually a better case than the original one," she said quietly. "For Cadden, yes," Ren said. "He's arguing that he's stable because of an unregistered, incomplete Omega whose wolf hasn't finished," she said. "He's arguing it accurately," Ren said. "The question is whether the council agrees that accurate is sufficient." She nodded. "Then we wait," she said. Ren nodded back. "Then we wait." She went back to the bench. The sky had not changed, the same thick pale gray, the same held quality. She sat down and she waited with the practice of someone who had learned that waiting was not a passive state, but an active engagement with a present moment that you could not accelerate by wanting it to resolve faster. Hours passed. She ate lunch in the kitchen, alone, the cook offering her extra bread without comment, which was its own kind of message. She went back to the bench. At 3 in the afternoon, the doors of the administrative building opened and the council representatives filed out, and after them Ren, and after Ren, Cadden. She did not stand. She stayed on the bench and watched him cross the courtyard toward her, and she read his face the way she had learned to read it. The managing expression was not present. The grief expression was not present. What was present was the open expression she had seen only once before, in her small East Wing room that morning, and it had not been present when he was winning something. It had been present when he was allowing something. He sat down next to her on the bench. She waited. "The challenge was dismissed," he said. "The council ruled that the documentation of continued capacity was sufficient. Voss's case was judged to lack the threshold of evidence required for a formal recommendation." He paused. The independent representatives both voted against the recommendation. The 5-pack representatives voted 3-2 against. "Who voted for it?" she said. "Dren," he said, which was not a surprise, "and one of the outer pack representatives who is connected to the Voss territory by marriage." He paused. "Both of them will be carrying this outcome back to their respective interests. This is not finished. Voss will regroup." "I know," she said, "but not today." "Not today," he agreed. She looked at the northeast corner of the sky. The winter star was not visible in the afternoon light, but she knew it was there. "You told them my name," she said. "Yes," he said. "You told them about the resonance." "Yes." "You told them the truth about the progression." "Yes," he looked at her directly. "You told me not to make it small." She held his gaze. "I didn't think you'd take it that far." "I don't do things halfway," he said. "When I do them." She thought about a decree at dawn. She thought about the 2 cups that appeared on the tray before anyone asked. She thought about all the ways he had communicated things in the months since she had arrived. through systems and arrangements and careful indirections that were the language he had available to him. Today he had used plain words. "All right," she said. They sat on the bench in the cold courtyard for a while without speaking. The fortress continued around them, guards changing, servants moving, the building doing what buildings did, which was continue regardless of the events inside them. The east courtyard tree in the northeast corner dropped one dry leaf in the still air and it fell straight down, no wind to deviate it. "What happens next?" she said eventually. He was quiet for a moment. "The council sends its ruling to all pack representatives. Voss's formal notice of inquiry is officially closed. His network inside the fortress is being documented," and he paused. "Addressed." He looked at her. "What happens next here is that the fortress returns to its regular schedule." "The third floor," she said. "The third floor," he said. She looked at her hands. She thought about the plain chair, the 2 cups, the bracket log with the date already filled in. "I'm not going to take the domestic contract," she said. "I told you that this morning." "I remembered. So what does that mean, formally, for my position here?" He was quiet for a moment. She understood that he was thinking about how to say the thing correctly, the way he always thought about that, and she waited, and he said, "I don't know yet what the formal language looks like. I've been running a system of one for 4 years, and the system doesn't have a category for this." "Then we build one," she said. He looked at her. "We have time," she said. "No one is asking for the paperwork tonight." Something in his expression shifted, and it was the expression she had seen in the doorway of the south chamber on a dozen nights when she had come down the corridor, and he had been waiting without planning to, and the room had turned out to be exactly the size it needed to be for both of them. "No," he said, "no one is asking tonight." She stood up from the bench. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, and then he took it, the grip of a man who had learned to hold things carefully because he knew the cost of not holding them carefully enough. They walked back into the fortress together through the inner gate. She thought, "This is today." She thought, "This is enough." She thought, "More will follow." That evening the servants' hall had an atmosphere that Sira recognized but could not have named, the specific quality of a building that has been holding its breath for some time and has just exhaled. Not celebration, exactly. Relief was too small a word and too large a feeling to fit the room evenly. What it was, more precisely, was the collective resumption of normal. People ate and talked. The kitchen staff sent extra bread, which they apparently did whenever something large had resolved, though no one confirmed this directly. Nell came to the end of the table and sat across from Sira and looked at her for a moment and then said, "The ruling stands." "Yes," Sira said. Dren submitted a formal note of dissent to the record. "I know. He's within his rights to do so." "He is," Sarah said. "It doesn't change the ruling." Nell looked at her with the clear and observant gaze of someone who had spent 3 years paying attention to the people in this building, and had, in the last 6 weeks, quietly upgraded her level of attention toward one of them in particular. "He's going to be difficult," Nell said. "Dren, not immediately. He'll wait for an opportunity." "I know. And Voss. I know that too." Nell folded her hands. "You're not particularly alarmed." "I'm paying attention," Sira said. "That's different from alarmed." Nell almost smiled, not quite, the near smile of a person who finds something appropriate rather than funny. "There was a woman in this position before you," she said. "Not this specific assignment, there hasn't been a night worker on that corridor in 6 years, but in a position that required that kind of attention." She paused. "Lysa." Sira went very still. "I don't know if you knew that," Nell said. "I didn't." Nell nodded. "She came here for a border meeting and stayed for 6 weeks, and then she stayed permanently, and then she was gone." She paused. "She wasn't like you. She was very different from you, louder in the way of people who have always felt welcome in rooms, but she paid attention in the same way." She looked at Sira directly. "She would have liked you." Sira held this for a moment. It was a gift of a specific type, not comfort, not comparison, but a kind of permission. The permission that comes when someone who knew a person well tells you they would have recognized you. "Thank you," she said. Nell stood. She went back to the window table. She did not look back. Sira finished her dinner and thought about a woman named Lysa who had paid attention in the same way. She thought about a stone carving of a resting wolf that fit inside a closed hand. She thought about the way Cadden had said her name in an official council chamber, simply and without qualification, and what it meant to have your name in a person's mouth in the most difficult moment they'd faced in 4 years. She went to her shift at midnight. The corridor was the same as it always was, stone and lamp light and the smell of the building's old warmth. The cleaning cart was in its place. The bracket log had tonight's date on the top page, filled in already in the handwriting she recognized. She checked the mop, checked the cloths, checked the tray. The south door was open. Not a sliver, not partway. Fully, completely, the entire doorframe available, the amber room visible in its whole, desk, map, fire, the plain chair and the chair by the hearth and the lamp on its side table, and the small stone wolf on the windowsill catching the light from the right angle so she could see, finally, the detail of its face. Eyes open, the patient expression of something that had found its ground. He was at the desk. He turned when she entered. She set the tray down. She sat in the plain chair. She looked at the fire. He looked at the fire. After a while she said, "Nell told me about Lisa, that she paid attention the same way." "Yes," he said, "she did. She said Lisa would have liked me." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have argued with you," he said. "She argued with everyone she respected. It was how she showed it." He paused. "She would have been right about you eventually." "That's a good way to be right about someone," Sierra said. "It is," he said. They were quiet for a while. The fire settled. The lamp made its small, steady light. Through the high windows, the night sky had shifted from the day's gray to the clear cold of true dark, and the winter star she had been watching from the bench was visible now, bright at its early winter angle. "I've been thinking about the wolf lore," she said eventually. "The resonance, what Wren told me." "Yes." He said an omega whose spirit is in active development can interrupt the gray's progression. She looked at the fire. "What does that mean for the development, for the wolf? Does the interrupting change it, change the process?" He turned from the fire and looked at her with the full attention she had come to know, the kind that did not hold anything back. "Yes," he said. "In the older documentation, the sources that predate formal pack organization, it's described as mutual. The Omega's developing spirit finds something to develop toward. The Alpha's fractured core finds something stable to rest against. They change each other." She held this. "I thought my wolf was broken," she said. "Since I was 16, I thought it hadn't finished, and that not finishing was a kind of damage." "You weren't damaged," he said. "I know that now," she said. Nell said still becoming, Claire said non-declining. She paused. "I think I was becoming something specific, and it took until now to find what." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." She thought about all the roads, all the provisional places, all the careful management of her own expectations so that she never invested too much in any floor she was standing on before she knew it could hold her. She thought about a narrow bed in the east wing and the strip of sky in the window, and the first night she had lain there thinking about where she would go next. She thought nowhere else. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to the desk, to the papers, to the map on the wall with its question marks and its incomplete borders, and she turned back to the fire, and they were in the same room, which had always been the right size for both of them. Later that night, when her shift was almost done and the corridor had been mopped, and the cloths folded and the bracket log completed, she stood for a moment at the top of the stairs and looked back at the south door. It was closed. He had gone to sleep. The lamp was out. She had never seen the lamp out before. It had always been burning when she left. She looked at the closed door in the dark corridor for a moment. She thought, that is what not managing alone looks like. She went downstairs and through the kitchen and down the east wing hallway and into her room, and she lay on the narrow bed and looked at the strip of sky that was beginning, very slowly, to lighten at its edge with the first suggestion of morning. She did not think about roads. She thought about the winter star, which was there every night whether she could see it or not, and about the wolf on the windowsill with its patient open eyes, and about the specific and deliberate warmth of a room that had always had 2 chairs by its fire, one of which had been waiting. She thought, the things that are still becoming are the most alive ones. She thought, I am still becoming. She thought, good. She closed her eyes. Outside, the morning made its slow approach. Inside the fortress of Cadden Vale, in the east wing, in the smallest and plainest room, a woman who had spent 6 years carrying herself lightly enough to move on short notice was lying in the same place she had lain the night before. And the night before that. And the one before that. She slept, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not dream of leaving. Maid. 3 weeks after the council ruling, the Interpack Council sent a formal follow-up notice to the fortress. It was routine, a procedural document confirming the closed status of the Voss inquiry, the formal recording of Dren's dissent in the official record, and a standard request for a 6-month stability report from the challenged party. The stability report was not punitive. It was the same document submitted after any formal review, regardless of outcome. Proof of continued capacity, documented and signed, due in 6 months. Edna received the notice and logged it in the household administrative calendar without comment. She did, however, send Sira a note in the message basket that said, 6 months is a manageable timeline, well within the scope of a permanent contract. Sira read the note, folded it, and placed it in the lockbox with the other important things. The days had settled back into themselves after the review, but they had settled back into a different shape than they had been before. The differences were small and consistent. She no longer pretended to hear only what she was meant to hear in the corridor conversations. Ren had stopped arriving in the east courtyard without announcement and had begun sending a note first, which was his way of treating the situation as one that had been formally acknowledged rather than quietly tolerated. Orin had made one change to his patrol route. He now included a pause at the top of the south corridor stairs at 2 in the morning, a 3-second stop, the kind of stop that said I am here and the corridor is secure, a thing he had apparently decided was worth demonstrating after the fact of everything else. Edna had said nothing about any of this. She had, however, adjusted the cleaning cart so that the items on it were organized more efficiently than before, in a way that saved Sira approximately 4 minutes per shift. Edna did not explain this. Sira did not ask. The fortress had reorganized itself around the new shape of things with the same quiet efficiency that it organized everything else, and Sira found, to her continuing mild astonishment, that there was a place in that new shape that fit her precisely. On a Tuesday in early winter, Cadden came to find her in the east courtyard in the afternoon. This was not unusual anymore. He came to find her occasionally in the afternoons when the administrative load permitted, and they walked the inner courtyard or sat on the bench, or, when the cold was too serious for the outdoors, stood in the east corridor near the window that faced the inner grounds. These were not formal occasions. They were the ordinary time of two people who had decided to spend some portion of their ordinary time in the same place, which was its own kind of formalization. Today he was carrying something. She saw it as he came through the gate, a small object wrapped in cloth, held in one hand with the specific care of something that was either fragile or important, and in his case she suspected both. He sat down on the bench. She sat. He held the cloth-wrapped object for a moment, looking at it. "The stone carving," she said. "Yes." She waited. "It was Lisa's," he said. "She brought it from the southern border when she came the first time. She said it was from her mother's house." He paused. "She left it on the windowsill the morning after she died. I think she would have taken it back to the southern border eventually. When the visit was over, she didn't intend to leave it." Sira sat with this quietly. She did not say "I'm sorry" because she had already said that and it had already cost something to say it, and she was not going to make it smaller by repeating it. She let it be what it was, a fact carried 4 years, held carefully. "I've been thinking about what it means to keep it," he said. "About what keeping it says, whether it's," he paused, "whether it's something I'm holding because I need to hold it, or because putting it down would mean something I haven't been ready to let mean something." She looked at the cloth-wrapped object, then she looked at him. "Those don't have to be opposites," she said. "You can be ready to put something down and still need to have held it." He looked at her. "The 4 years weren't wrong," she said. "The carrying wasn't wrong. Grief doesn't have a deadline." She met his gaze. "But there's a difference between holding something and holding onto something. You know which one you're doing." He was quiet for a long moment. "I do know," he said. She waited. "I've been holding on to it," he said, not with shame, with the clean acknowledgement of something accurately named. Not grief, the grief was real, but the holding on to was its own thing. Something I built around it because the grief gave me a shape, and without the shape I didn't know. He stopped. I didn't know what I was without it. She thought about what it meant to build a life around the shape of what you were carrying. She thought about roads and provisional places and the careful discipline of not investing before confirmation. She thought about all the years she had kept herself light enough to leave and how that lightness had been its own kind of carrying. I know what that is, she said. He looked at her. The shape you build around something you're carrying, she said. The way you organize yourself around the weight of it so that the weight is what structures you. She paused. And then the weight changes, and you have to figure out what structures you without it. He held the cloth-wrapped carving and looked at her for a long moment. What structured you, he said, when you stopped being organized around everything you were carrying? She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she said. I think I'm still finding out. She paused. That's what still becoming means. You don't get the answer first, you get the answer while you're moving. He turned the wrapped object in his hands once, gently. Then he set it on the stone bench between them. Not giving it to her, not throwing it away. Setting it down in the particular way that things are set down when you have carried them long enough and have finally found the right surface and the right moment and the right company. She looked at the bench beside her. She looked at him. He looked at the winter sky, the same thick pale gray as the day of the review, the same held quality except that today it was holding something different. Not a storm, something softer. Snow tonight, he said. Probably, she said. They sat on the bench in the cold afternoon while the sky organized itself above them, and neither of them said anything about what had been set down or what came after or what structures replaced the ones that were no longer necessary. Those were questions for the moving toward, not for right now. Right now was the bench and the cold and the winter sky. Later that evening in the south chamber, the fire was burning at its usual level and the 2 cups were on the desk, and the map on the wall had 3 new green lines on it where the question marks had been. Wren's team had confirmed the border positions and marked them accurately. The yellow lines replaced with solid ones, the uncertainties resolved into something you could plan around. Sierra sat in the plain chair and looked at the green lines. Better, she said. Clearer, he said from the desk, not the same thing but useful. She thought about the difference between better and clearer, and she thought it was a useful distinction, the kind that only became available to you after you had been through enough unclear things that you no longer confused resolution with improvement. The stability report, she said, in 6 months. Yes. What does it require? Documentation of continued capacity, operational record, no repeat of the challenge grounds. He paused. Witness testimony is optional but strengthens the submission. Oren will submit his guard log, she said. Probably. Edna will submit the operational journal. She's already indicated that. Claire will submit the assessment update. He looked at her. She'll need something to update it with, a 6-month reevaluation. I know, Sierra said. We'll do the reevaluation. She held his gaze. Both of us. He was still for a moment, then both of us. She looked back at the map. She thought about 6 months of green lines and closed questions, and the quiet accumulation of evidence that a thing was working, not perfectly, not without difficulty, but working in the specific and sustainable way that things work when they are correctly placed. She thought about the stability report and what it would show, and what she already knew it would show, because she had been watching the evidence accumulate for weeks. The gray had not come. Not once, not in 3 weeks, not in the territory of its usual frequency. She had not said this out loud. He had not said it out loud. But it was in the room with them every night the way the fire was in the room, a warmth neither of them pointed at because pointing would have made it smaller than it was. She said it now. It hasn't come, she said. He was quiet. In 3 weeks, she said, the expected frequency based on what Wren described. I know what the frequency was, he said. Is it different, do you feel? Different, he said, not as a question, as an answer, yes. She thought about resonance, about a developing wolf and a fractured core and what happened when they were in proximity long enough for the frequencies to find each other. She thought about Claire's notation, stable, non-declining. She thought about the older lore that Wren had found, the language about mutual change. What does different feel like? She said. He turned from the desk and looked at her directly. He thought about it with the honesty she had come to rely on, the specific quality of someone who did not give answers before they were ready, but gave the accurate one once they were. Quieter, he said, not empty, quieter, the pressure, the thing that builds and that I've been managing, it's still there, but it's slower, it doesn't have the same forward momentum. He paused, like something has been giving it somewhere to go. She held this. She thought about her wolf, the cracked, quiet, persistent thing that had been pressing forward toward the south corridor every night before she understood what it was doing. She thought about it now, and it was still there, it was always there, but it was different too, not pressing forward, not searching, arrived. Mine too, she said. It's quieter. He looked at her. I thought it would feel like more, she said honestly. When it finished, when the wolf was complete, I thought it would be loud, a rush, something that announced itself. She paused. It's just present, it's just there, fully. He said, when did it happen? She thought about it. She thought about the day of the review, standing in the east courtyard watching the sky. She thought about the evening Nell had said Lysa would have liked you. She thought about the bench in the cold afternoon and the cloth-wrapped carving set down on the stone between them. I think, she said, it's been happening all along, I just stopped measuring it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted into the open thing she had seen only a handful of times, the expression of someone who has spent years being correctly composed and has decided, for a specific and sufficient reason, to simply be whatever they actually are. Sarah, he said. Yes, she said. Not answering a question, answering the thing underneath the question. The same way she had been answering things underneath questions since the first night in the corridor when he had told her the tray could go inside, which had not been about the tray at all and had never been about the tray. He stood from the desk. He crossed the room and sat down in the chair by the fire, his chair, not the plain one, and he reached over and picked up the second cup from the desk and handed it to her, and she took it, and they sat in the amber room with the winter outside and the green lines on the map and the resolved questions and the quiet that was the right kind of quiet. The full kind, the kind that had somewhere to land. She thought about a decree at dawn. She thought some things need to be said out loud. She thought some things say themselves. Outside, the snow began. She heard it before she saw it, a change in the quality of the silence, the way falling things softened the air around them. Then she looked to the high windows and saw it, the first slow fall of white against the dark glass, each flake catching the amber lamp light for a moment before it passed beyond. The fortress of Cadden Vale settled into the particular silence that large stone buildings settle into when winter arrives, and the world outside becomes very still, and the warmth inside becomes very present. She held her cup. He held his. The fire burned at its steady level, the level that happened when someone had been tending it carefully for a long time. In the morning, there would be the stability documentation to begin. There would be the 6-month timeline. There would be the formal language for a position that did not yet have a formal name, the careful building of a structure that could hold what needed to be held. There would be Dren, who would find his moment, and Voss, who would regroup, and all the complications that existed in the spaces between a council ruling and the actual, daily, ongoing work of being where you were. There would be all of that. Tonight there was the fire, and the snow, and the 2 cups, and the south door that did not close between midnight and morning any more, because the person who had always been on the other side of it had stopped needing it to. And at the top of the 3rd-floor corridor, in a stone bracket beside a door that stood open, the clean tray from last night sat empty, waiting to be collected, which was the small, ordinary evidence of an ordinary thing. 2 people in the same room, fed and warm and present. She thought, this is what staying looks like. She thought, I know what this is. She thought nothing else because there was nothing else to think. The room was full and the fire was lit and the snow was falling on the stones of the fortress, and she was exactly where she was, which was the only place she had ever needed to be. The decree, by the time the snow had finished falling, had traveled further than anyone inside the fortress had intended. It had moved through the standard channels at first, a corridor gossip compressed to a single sentence, guard communications, the domestic staff networks that connected every large building in the 5-pack territories. But somewhere along that chain, the sentence had changed its nature. It had stopped being a piece of administrative news and had become a story. Not an embellished one, not the kind of story that people grow to exaggerate the central event into something implausible. The kind that stays close to its source, because the source is already unusual enough that embellishment would only make it smaller. Sira found out about this from the most ordinary of sources, a letter that arrived in the domestic message basket from a cousin of one of the kitchen workers, from a settlement 2 territories south, asking in the careful language of someone who has heard a thing second or third hand and wants to confirm it without sounding credulous. Was it true that the Alpha King of the Northern Territories had posted a formal decree about a night shift maid? Was it true that the decree was still in effect? Was it true that the maid had stayed? The kitchen worker had come to Sira with the letter because she was not sure what to do with it, and Edna had told her, apparently, to bring unusual correspondence about the household to the relevant parties, and Sira was the relevant party. Sira read the letter twice. She handed it back. "Tell her yes," she said, "all 3. The kitchen worker nodded and went away, and Sira stood in the corridor and thought about the way stories moved through territories and what they carried when they moved. She thought about women in border settlements who had heard about a decree and wanted to know if a woman had stayed. She thought about what it meant to them that the answer was yes. She understood it better than she wanted to analyze. She had been for 6 years a person who kept herself movable. She had not done this entirely by choice. The options available to an unclaimed Omega without full wolf manifestation were not extensive, and movement was often the only available response to a door that closed. But she had also, she now understood, become skilled at moving beyond what was strictly necessary, using the habit of it as a defense against the specific kind of pain that came from investing in a floor that later collapsed. The women who had sent that letter were not asking about the decree itself. They were asking about the staying. They were asking because they wanted to know if it was possible to be something incomplete and specific and unclaimed and still find a place that was the right shape for what you were. She thought about what she would have wanted to know at 17, on a stone road going north. She would have wanted to know yes, without explanation, without qualification, just yes. She went back to her shift. The corridor was the same, the lamp was the same. The cart was the same, reorganized by Edna into its efficient new order. The bracket log was open to a fresh page with tomorrow's date already filled in. She looked at the date in that handwriting. She thought there will be a tomorrow, and a day after that, and the dates will continue to be filled in, not because it is required, but because it is the thing a person does when they have decided they are staying, and want to mark that decision in the small, daily, unremarkable way that staying is actually built from. She picked up the mop. She began at the north end of the corridor. The fortress settled into its winter rhythms around her, the cold that pressed into the stone by midnight, the particular quality of the lamp light in the coldest months, the way the whole building seemed to breathe more slowly when the temperature dropped outside and the fires inside became more necessary. She had not yet spent a full winter here. She did not know all the specific rhythms of it. She was, in that specific way, still learning the building. She thought, I will know them by spring. She thought, and by the following winter I will know them the way I know the 7th stair creak, and the 4 o'clock bread smell, and the precise angle of the afternoon light in the east courtyard in early winter. She thought, I will know this place the way you know a place you are in, truly and fully in, not as a person passing through. She finished the north section and worked her way south. She was on the last stretch near the south door when the door opened. He stood in the frame with the amber light behind him and the corridor lamp in front of him, the warm and the warmer, and he looked at her in the way he always looked at her, which was the way she had taken weeks to name and now named simply, as himself. The snow stopped, he said. I know, she said. I can hear it, the quality of the silence changed. He looked at her, then he looked at the mop in her hands. You have 4 meters left, he said. I do. I'll wait, he said. He leaned against the door frame and waited while she finished the last 4 meters of the corridor with the focused efficiency she brought to everything she did well. She wrung out the mop, set it in the bucket, pushed the cart to the north end. She walked back down the corridor toward the open door, and the light and the man leaning in the frame. She thought about the first time she had stood at this end of the corridor and looked at the south end and thought, whatever this job is, I can do it. She thought, I did not know then what the job was. She thought, I know now. She walked through the door. He moved aside to let her in. The room was warm and the fire was burning, and the 2 cups were on the small table beside the hearth, where they had been moved at some point in the last few weeks to their permanent location, the location they lived at now, ready. She sat in the plain chair, he sat in his. The fire was between them as it had always been, the warmth of it distributed evenly, reaching both chairs the same. She picked up her cup. He picked up his. Outside, the snow lay on the stones of the fortress and on the courtyard, and on the eastern border that had been properly marked now, and on the tree in the northeast corner of the courtyard, which was surviving its 3rd winter in the cold and doing well. The wolf on the windowsill caught the fire light and held it, open-eyed and patient, the way it always had, the way certain things hold what they are given. She thought about the note in the domestic message basket, the question from 2 territories south. She thought about what she would say to it, really say, if she had more than a yes to give. She would say, the place that is the right shape for what you are is not always where you expect it. It is rarely where you expect it. It may take 6 years and a dozen provisional floors to reach it. But it does not require you to be complete before you arrive. It does not require you to have resolved everything you are carrying. It only requires you to walk in the right direction and keep your eyes open. And when you find it, you will know. Not because it is announced, not because someone posts a decree, though sometimes a decree is part of the vocabulary available to a person who has been searching for the right language for a very long time. You will know because the room will be exactly the size it needs to be. She thought, that is what I would say. She thought, I will say it eventually, there is time. She held her cup, the fire held its warmth, the winter held its quiet, and in the stone fortress of Cadden Vale, in a room with 2 chairs and a map on the wall and a wolf on the windowsill, the night moved toward morning the way it had always moved, steadily, with no hurry, committed to arriving. And she was there for the arriving. She was there.